Hey, welcome back to the Crash Space Grid. I forget that the transition is way faster than the one for the Magic Ball Grid, so it caught me off guard. How's everyone doing? Happy Friday for those who are celebrating that. It is finally the video content, the stream content, where I get to talk about a board game that came out last year that is a very fascinating board game. Because overall, as you might see by the end of this video, I don't know if I like this game, but on the second hand, I've played a lot of it. I think I've registered like 42 games of Daybreak since it came out late last year. It was on a lot of people's best games of 2024 list, so it got a lot of press attention. It is a fantastic production, its theme, its tone, the art, the way it's produced. There is so much good to say about this game, but then we'll also have to play it. And that's when we're going to have a pretty rich conversation, I hope, about why I don't think this game lands for me in a lot of different ways. Brendan, how's it going? It's the space. Watching the game has got me looking at getting into it. All right, well, we'll see maybe after the whole stream. Question: are they still printing this? And how much would it cost to get everything? Seems moderish. I'm curious since like I'm going in on all things I like. Shadow, I guess you're asking about Marvel Champions, right? Talking about Marvel Champions, yeah, I say. So to get everything, they're technically not printing everything anymore. There is at least a handful of Marvel Champions products that are now no longer in print. It's a bummer. Some of it is like boxes, like deluxe boxes of stuff. So one of my favorites, sorry, small tangent here, is Sinister Motives is this like standalone, largely standalone product. It's a box that you can play that goes through some Spider-Man villains. And I'm a big Spider-Man fan. Now this has been out of print and they're not going to reprint it, they've said. So unless they change their policy on this, this will just not come back. Some of the older hero packs from the first wave, those are mostly Avengers like Captain America, Hulk, Doctor Strange. Those are not going to be reprinted. And some of those packs are actually really quite good. Sinister Motives was fantastic. So it's in a weird space right now where they just recently announced this whole thing that they won't be reprinting packs. And some people are like made a run on the market. Some people are scalping stuff. It's all over the place. Short or long as you don't need everything, you really don't. They are going to say that they'll probably reprint a different, Hulk in the future because Hulk is out of print, stuff like that. So you'll be able to visit everything eventually, but unfortunately you can't get everything and not everything's in print anymore. The Crash Space with the guy who hates space. Eric, I haven't thought about it like that. Maybe that's why I'm crashing into it. Lucille, how's it going? I'm almost not late. The DST mismatch period is awful. I feel like, isn't it good? Isn't it nice because it's earlier? Where it's not like 3 a.m. to watch a stream on a Thursday night or something. How you doing? Hopefully you're well. Okay, so today on the stream, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about Daybreak. We're going to do a rules explanation. We're going to give you a bit of a background, and then we're going to play a couple games online. The stream won't be as long as the last week's, because we spent a lot of time playing Marvel Champions. But we'll explain this pretty important game and how it works, and we'll play a couple rounds, and I'll explain all the sort of like frictions I have with it. It's earlier, but like all my vibes on When You Were Alive are off by an hour. Ah, the Spidey sense. Wait, don't you think this game is bad busted? Yeah, I think it is bad and busted. I think it is a pretty inherently busted game. But it is an important game because the theme is good and the production is good and a lot of people talked about it and it won some awards. So let's talk about it really quickly and then I'll do a rules explanation and then we'll talk about where I think things fall apart. I want to be very clear. I'll explain all of my, maybe not value neutral terms when I'm talking about some of these sort of things. Mind you, this game works from 1 player up to 4 player. And the majority of games I played this game have been at 2 or 1 player. I've only had the experience of playing it once with 4 players, which was my first ever game. And the 3 other players around the table was their first ever game. It was a Mansion Runner. It was sick. And we got bodied. We got really, really, really bodied pretty bad. And for what it's worth, that actually works into a bit of my thesis where the way that most people play Daybreak or naturally want to play Daybreak is actually the worst way to play it if you want to win the game. A game that I'm going to bring up in kind of in relation to this is if anyone's ever played Res Arcana. I really like Res Arcana. I might call it Res Arcana every once in a while. Res Arcana is this game where you draft a deck at the beginning of the game, if you're playing the draft mode, of different magical items. And each magical item is a bit of an engine piece. You can kind of see one behind my head, where this is the cost, and then next to it, every like upkeep, it produces these sort of icons. And then you use these icons and you use these elements to get other things. And you build this engine of all your moving pieces, and it's an absolute delight. However, as soon as you start playing Res Arcana at a higher level and people understand what they're meant to be doing, you realize most Res Arcana games, you play 2 of your 8 cards. And that's if you're lucky, because you can always discard a card to gain resources. And if you do the math, paying like 4 resources for this elemental spring that generates 3 resources a turn, when you can just spend an action to discard a card to immediately gain 2 resources, the question is how many turns does elemental spring need to be in play for it to actually be worth the tempo play of spending the action and paying 4 resources to go minus now? And that's what you learn with Res Arcana really quickly. Your first game is weird and it takes like 15 turns. And then once you get good at it, your games take 3 or 4 turns because people realize half the cards should not be played. And I think this is the sort of issue that, like, I think Res Arcana is a game that I like a lot more in some ways because I do end up drafting my deck. So the sort of problems and the sort of engine, I actually have like decisions when I generate them, which is not exactly the case. But I think we run into a similar problem with Daybreak as Res Arcana, where a lot of times our cards are, it's like building an engine is not the good thing to do. And we definitely built engines when we played 4 players. Big fan of Res Arcana. I haven't played the new 2-player version that came out late last year, but I played a lot of this with Maddie. I like it a lot. People who are good at it are really good at it. Cold Lava is pretty good at this game. I got to play with him a while ago. All right, so what's Daybreak? Daybreak is a board game that came out by CMYK. It's produced by CMYK. They make really lovely productions, and this is no different. It was designed by Matt Leacock and Matteo Manapace. You're probably more familiar with Matt Leacock. I'm not sure what Matteo has made, but Matt Leacock made Pandemic and worked on a lot of the legacy stuff and has been like a pretty big name in the board game space. You can find a whole bunch of different talks online that Matt Leacock has run because Matt Leacock has been around for a long time. Again, apologies, I don't know too much about Matteo Manapace. I should have researched that a bit. And it's a game in which you control one of the global powers around the world, and your goal is basically to overcome the issue of global warming. And you do that by enacting and supporting policies. It's really kind of neat because things are dire, things are bad, and they get worse very quickly, and things compound horribly if you don't try and bring things backwards. And you have the ability to bring things backwards. You technically usually have the ability to solve things and eventually get this thing called drawdown. Drawdown is the point in time in which the amount of carbon CO2 you're producing is less than the CO2 that the environment can absorb. And so in theory, the world will start cooling down naturally, which is what you want. It's cool because it does this by, you know, having policy changes, incentive changes, like big things, but small big things, like a bunch of different programs and, you know, encouragements and global projects. All these together can fix it. And so that is like a kind of a positive tone. It's not like you play a card that says people stop using paper straws or people start cutting up, you know, the circles so the turtles don't die. Like, it's not like that. It's more, I'd argue, realistic. And while I know very little about this on a professional level, from what I've heard from other people, the representation of things on this are pretty well researched. And Wells research is actually a really big part of this because this game has a website. Every card that you play, like this geothermal plants, it has a QR code on it. And if you scan the QR code, it'll open this page. And on this page, not only do you get some information about how the card works and explains it in terms, but it also explains like a textbook about what this could possibly mean for the world and why it should be pursued. It is really cool as an educational item if you want to know more about the sort of things that global powers could be doing to stop the world from slowly cooking 0.1 degree at a time. I never got into the games at the level happily, so we just build engines and have the intended experience with Res Arcana. Yes, as soon as you play good Res Arcana, it's a totally different game. Mateo's only listed design on BGG is this game. Okay, cool. Very cool. Very cool. And this is what a card looks like. And you notice it has a QR code at the bottom if you can scan it. That's a pretty neat thing. So there's a lot of like a social studies textbook in this game too. And again, all the art and all the way that things are depicted, it is colorful. It is hopeful. There is some like bad cards, some like bad encounter cards that have like grim things on it. Shout out to the one card called Pandemic that Matt Leacock put out again. Those have like a different art style that is a lot more dire. And I like the change, but everything is presented in this like sort of positive, sort of clean tone. And I think it's a tricky subject to talk about without making this game an entire bummer where you're struggling to keep the world from baking itself and we all die. But then also you have like, oh, look, a little squirrel. Like, it's nice. I really like the production of this. They also shot this out on the front too. This is produced in a super sustainable way where there's no plastics, no textiles. Everything comes from recycled materials. I don't know if it's produced locally. I'm assuming it's not. And when you get it, nothing is wrapped again in plastic and all the pieces are screen painted wood. I think that's a term for it, which I love way more than plastic in my board game. The sort of like organizer it comes with is the sort of like compostable like takeout containers. Like, it is incredibly charming. The box is also just big enough to hold everything. There's a lot about this production, and if you've played any other CMYK game, you expect the production to be really good, and it is no difference here. CMYK does fantastic stuff. Okay, with that, we can jump into the game. Oh, I do want to shout out, this is what the game looks like. We'll come back to that. And of course, it did win the Connoisseur Game of the Year at the Spiel des Jahres last year. It was called E-Mission, mind you, in European markets. So in Germany, it's E-Mission, Emission in France, but we know it as Daybreak everywhere else. And you can play it. You can play it online. This is Board Game Arena. It's a website that is technically free for you to play board games. If you want to pay the like deluxe $7 a month or whatever it is, it's something around that. You are now allowed to create games, which means you can create solo games. But if you ever want to jump on BGA and try out Daybreak, you just have to join someone's public Daybreak game. I'm not sure how big the public scene is because I only hit this button to play solo, and I have played a lot of this game. This will be our 43rd play of this game. Again, the majority of them are solo. I've done most of them here, and one of the reasons why that's the case is that this game is actually very short. I'm actually surprised. The timer here says 20 minutes for a 1 to 4 player game, and that might be accurate. Most of my 1 player games of this game take less than 10 minutes. Which in person, and mind you, I owned this game. I got this game on the day it came out. I was very excited for this for so many reasons. I have sold it. I've given it off to a friend for money because I didn't want it in my collection anymore because it would not see play. I think the only amount of play this would see, because Maddie really didn't care for this game, would be single player, and that means I can just probably play on BGA. And the fact that a game takes 9 minutes means me taking the box out and setting it up honestly takes longer sometimes than actually playing the game, which is a bummer, which is why we end up on BGA. And so we'll play a game. This one will take more than 9 minutes because we're going to explain all the rules, but we'll dive in a second. Okay, it loads up, and you'll notice something that is honestly a thing that bothers me a heck of a lot. So, oh, we did challenge cards. We're going to say no challenge card here, so we can ignore that, but you can make the game slightly harder for you. So as you notice, the game loads up, and BGA has a representation of this game that is not going to sell the game super well, because BGA is always a bit Spartan. It is more so that it looks well on a phone and on a screen, but it's not as gorgeous as having, you know, physical components is. That's a big part of board games, is touching physical stuff and moving physical stuff is an absolute treat. But what you might notice is if we go to this picture over here on the Daybreak, there's this giant board that comes in the game box that displays a massive thermometer, which is the big thing that you're really worrying about in this game. It has a bunch of these tracks, and then of course there's a giant map of the world, including New Zealand. They nailed it. And you'll notice that this board just doesn't appear here at all. It kind of shows up here in the bottom, but it's like just has 2 numbers on it, the amount of trees and the amount of water. And that's because, honestly, a thing I really don't care about this game, the board doesn't matter. For what it's worth, this game has a massive board that goes in the center, and it looks so nice, and you think it's going to be a game where you reach over and look at the board and everyone makes good decisions and you move things around and the global powers care about their zone. The board functionally doesn't matter. All that this board holds is these 6 tracks to remind you how dice have rolled, which doesn't need to be on the planet. The board itself and the map, the geography of the map, has no implication on the game, and then this thermometer also just exists on the side. This is so wild to me that this board, for as big as it is, has no implication in the game. And for something about global powers, it just doesn't matter. And they just take it away in BGA, which is the right thing to do. Because when you place trees and you place water on the board, where they go, it doesn't matter. This sounds like maybe a moot point or like a small point, but it's just so strange that this game has this center beautiful piece. And it is functionally like just a lot of space to hold 6 different tracks. It's very, very strange. Okay, we'll pull out here and we'll talk about how this game works. So this game has one single win condition like some of the other Matt Leacock games, but has a lot of different lose conditions. So the first thing here is that we have this thermometer. And the game is divided into 2 phases. It's technically more than that. I think there's like the crisis phase and then the environmental phase. They have names, but functionally you can break this down into 2 phases, and it's exactly like Marvel Champions. There is the hero phase. That's the phase right now where we do all our stuff, and then we basically pass priority, and then it's the villain phase. It's the mythos phase, where then all the bad things happen to us, where we check the thermometer. It usually goes up. We draw a bunch of encounter cards. We do all those sort of stuff, and that's pretty bad. Like, that's the good stuff phase and the bad stuff phase. Luckily, we start with the good stuff phase. So we only have one win condition, and that is by reaching something called drawdown. And drawdown is the point in the world in which the amount of CO2, the amount of emissions we're producing, is less than the amount of CO2 that the environment can absorb. The idea is right now we are creating 20 carbon emissions, but the environment can only sequester 10 of those carbon emissions, which means we net 10 carbon every turn. The more net carbon that we put out every turn, the more this thermometer goes up. And if this thermometer ever hits this top 2-degree change in global temperature, we lose. The planet is effing cooked. Hey, Kat, how you doing? How's your Friday? So that is a big thing. Our goal is basically to get this number down, because the lower it is, the slower this thing grows. But on the turn where this number goes negative and we're actually producing less and we get to negative net carbon, where the environment can absorb more carbon, but there's not more carbon to absorb, that is the time in which we reach drawdown. As soon as you reach drawdown, all you need to do is survive the enemy phase, the villain phase, whatever you want to call it, the crisis phase. And if you can just survive that, if you don't hit any of the other lose conditions, you win. It doesn't matter how bad your community in crisis are. It doesn't matter if you're short on energy for your population. As long as you can hit drawdown and survive the final round, the game is over. That is our 1-win condition. I believe we have 2 lose conditions. First one is if the thermometer ever hits the 2.0, you just lose. You're going to probably lose pretty quickly before you get to that point, because I'll explain how the game works, and this part is actually kind of really frustrating. The second thing you can lose to is that there's this chart here called Communities in Crisis. So whenever something bad happens, there's going to be a bunch of these encounter cards, like these upcoming crisis cards. You can see 1 and 2 of them are face down and they'll be flipped and we have to respond to them. Generally, these things will do bad things to you. And if you can't fulfill the bad things they require of you, they will cause you to get communities in crisis. And they fill up on this chart from left to right. We start with 1 here at the top. And so if we add the second and third, it'll fill up this row. And then if we fill up all 12 of these slots, we also lose the game. That is basically our nation collapsing because they're just in crisis. And you can gain crises through infrastructure crises, social crises, and also environmental crises. So those are not depicted differently on here, but those are the things that you can kind of fail in. But if we ever hit too many of these, we are cooked, and that is a lose condition. Notably, if we ever start a turn with 4 of these, so we hit the first one in this second row, or the 7th or whatever it is, 9th in here, we will also just draw fewer cards at the beginning of our turn. And that's really, really quite bad, because cards are the premier resource in this game. You use cards to do everything. So having too many community in crisis is not only is a lose condition, but it also just kind of puts mud in all the gears, which is pretty bad. Yeah, Shadow, this stream is just still Daybreak. I'm excited to do this. We also we managed to get Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. today in Canada, here in Quebec, but only in French. So that's not going to happen. This is depressing because I think we already hit that benchmark IRL. There's a chance we have. I don't know too much about it, but this seems to be like a near point of no return. This is 1.2 degrees since 1900. So we actually might be higher than that. Again, colorful images though, huh? So how do we get our carbon down? Well, we can tell how much carbon we're making by looking at this chart. Now, when you do play the game, you're going to be one of the 4 global nations, and each global nation has a slightly different board. And that board holds basically 2 different things. Firstly, the kind of energy you have and the demand. So notice we're making 6 dirty energy. That's this black energy. Can you see the mouse? Now you can, excuse me. And 3 clean energy. That's this green energy. So our combined energy output is 9 total energy. And this house here, this is the image for our energy demand. If we don't produce enough energy to meet our demand, the difference will have to take in communities in crisis. So not producing enough energy for a population is a problem for our population. Now, the fact that some of this is dirty and some of this is clean, our population doesn't care about that. They just need 9 energy. But anything that's basically this black thing is generally bad for you, and it means that this will produce carbon. So we are producing 6 carbon per turn because we have 6 bad energy. And then there's a whole bunch of different emissions here with different types. So it's like cars, buildings, factories, oil, food, might just be meat, could just be food, and then just trash. And so our nation's state, our country, our superpower starts by producing 14 different types of bad emissions. And so we're producing 14 emissions plus 6 dirty energy. So 6 plus 14 is 20. And that is why we're producing 20 carbon. So the goal of the game here is to basically make black box go down. So we can get rid of our emissions. They're harder to get rid of. Getting rid of them has no implication on any other game systems. We can also reduce our dirty energy, but that's a problem because if we don't have clean energy to offset the dirty energy we've lost, we'll hit communities in crisis when we don't produce enough energy. Notably, our energy demand also goes up +2 every round. Usually it's about +1. Sometimes it's the +2. In solo, it's always +2. So these are the things that we have to balance. We also have these things called resilience, which means these are our protections against things that attack us on different angles. So we have social, which is the fist. We have environmental, which is a leaf. And then we have, or ecological, excuse me. And then we have infrastructural, which is those kind of like crossed, I think it's a train track or a highway or something. Those kind of matter, but sort of not really at all. 2 Fahrenheit, 1.1 Celsius. So hang in there, I guess. Oh yeah, this is Celsius, mind you, because this is scientific. So we're probably not there yet. All right, so that's our whole goal. The entire goal of this game is to get these black things down. And basically, because we are sequestering 10 carbon, you might be asking, how do you know you're sequestering 10 carbon? That's because on Earth right now, we have 6 trees and 4 wetlands or oceans. And so for each tree on the board and for each wetland and ocean on the board, it will eat 1 carbon. So if this goes up, that's good because we sequester more carbon turn after turn after turn. But also if we produce less carbon, then obviously both ways will get us closer to hitting drawdown. So our goal is to reduce black stuff, bad, and to increase trees and water if we can. Carbon's delicious. Well, it's carcinogenic if you eat too much of it. So be careful, Brennan. So watch out. That's our goal. And I just want to frame that. Our goal in this game entirely is to get number down. And that's because if we don't get numbered down, systems get very bad very fast. This game is incredibly punishing, and I don't know how I feel about this, where if you fail early, it compounds in a really, really, really bad way. Now, I think you could argue this away and say, like, when we're teaching lessons about environmental impact, that's probably an important thing to teach, right? Like, it's harder to fix the later on you are. And I'll explain why that is. But in a board game, it is absolutely frustrating. And this is where I think this game ends up in the camp of like Res Arcana, where you have to basically don't engine build. Because engine building in this game is usually the wrong thing to do. You need to be so fluid, but you also need to be so myopic. Anything that you can do today to bring black down is the most important thing you can do. Because for every black that goes through, so say that we have 10 net carbon, we produce 20, 10 are sequestered, the extra carbon then goes to this thermometer. Each thermometer slat can take 5 cubes. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fills in the middle. And as soon as you fill in the slat, we put this band across the thermometer, which is cute. And then the thermometer basically goes up. So if we do nothing and just pass our turn, because we'll have plus 10 carbon, we will introduce 2 bands to the thermometer and we'll be up here at 1.4. Now that's very bad because for every slat on the thermometer, you have to draw more crisis cards. The crisis cards also just hit harder because as you might see here, and this will make more sense, this card says that it'll do 1 community crisis per band on the thermometer. So heaven forbid you hit 2 bands on turn 1, all of the damn cards hit worse. So it is such an important thing to do everything you can now and not give a shit about the future, which means if you play this like an engine builder and say, I'm not going to go full hog this turn and I'm going to build this engine that will pay off at 3 to 4 turns, that is ridiculous because this game is usually just 2 to 3 turns. It is so wild that this game presents itself as an engine builder, but what you learn really quickly if you want to win the game is F all that, throw everything you can at it now with no consequence to the future, because the best thing is you can bring black down now so you don't have 3 bands, so none of these encounter cards hit you for 3 times as bad. It cascades in such a frustratingly bad way that just taking a little bit extra damage now is worth 4 times as many problems in the future. An ounce of prevention is worth whatever the other ounces of things that we're trying to not do. It's like really, really a big problem with this game. On top of that, not only do you draw, or not draw technically, you have to draw a couple more bands before you hit another encounter card, but not only do the encounter cards hit worse, for every band you filled in, you have to roll this thing called the ecological damage dice. I don't know the real term for it, but basically for every band, you roll the die at 1 time. And so if we get 2 bands on round 1 because we do nothing, we roll the die twice. And every time you roll the die, random bad shit happens to you. It's literally every single thing in this game. If you bring the thermometer up, the game just accelerates so much worse and so much worse, which just highly, highly punishes you for doing anything besides everything you can do now. I'll be repeating that a lot, but you have to keep that in mind. That is my biggest problem with this game, is that most of the games you play in solo are 2 turns. And from what I understand, that's not that different when you play 3 to 4 players. So it's like playing Crim, kind of. I think at some point you have to install your Mystic Miami and hope. Even if it's natural variance, we're going to be in trouble. On a more positive note, the planet has ebbed and flowed for centuries, but we only have really measured in the short term, so it could be naturally have more variance. I think that is a dangerous way to think about it. Obviously, there's variance for sure, but if all the leading scientists on this issue are telling us we have to do massive changes immediately, technically like 10 years ago for this not to be a problem, I think that is the leading narrative here for sure. It's nice to know it's not as bad as it could be, maybe, but it is quite bad from my understanding. I am not an expert. I've played this board game 42 times. It's the 43rd. All right, so let's get to the gameplay. So our basic understanding how it works, we're going to do our turn. We're going to do everything we can to bring these blacks numbers down. Energy is important to have enough energy, otherwise our population will be unhappy. Technically, population, it can be slightly unhappy. We don't care. It doesn't stop you from losing the game, or it doesn't cause you to lose the game unless your population is massively unhappy. But the bigger problem is, and again, snowballing really bad. Say that we got 2 bands here, and then we drew this card that says, oh, you lose 1 community per crisis per band you have, and so we take 2 communities in crisis, and then we take another community crisis. Now our hand size goes down. Like, things cascade so aggressively. Once again, we just tempo out everything all the time, all at once. Is everyone locked in? Are we ready to play the game? Pull up that one XKCD chart, and it pretty much speaks for itself in terms of natural variance. XKCD 1732. All right, so it's our round now. And what's really cool about this game is that the engines in which the game works on are really smart. They're really clever. They're really easy to grok. They're very satisfying. As you heard in my opening argument, though, the problem is that engine building in this game is most massively disincentivized, that the cool systems that you have access to, you should not be touching. But how the game works is very simple. There's like basically 1.5 rules, and you could use those to have great outcomes. I think this engine in a different model could be a very satisfying game, a game that doesn't last, that does last more than 2 turns maybe, but like, you'll see what I mean here. So the first thing that happens during the player phase, I don't know the names of this, pardon, I do have the thing up, but it doesn't matter that much, is that we have to pick a global project. Ooh, I think we should take a second to say here that this game is kind of cool at 4 players, or at 2 players, or at 3 players. Because when you sit down, you pick one of the major superpowers that come in this game. So you either can be the US, you can be China, you can be Europe, or you can be other developing nations. They're all conglomerated at one. And each of those nations has their own problems. They start with different amounts of energy and different amounts of population growth, and they have different amounts of different types of emissions. As much as all the emissions technically do the same thing, they have no mechanical changes or mechanical text largely. But they also start with base cards. Mind you, these are the base cards we have. And so certain powers are better at different things. For instance, Europe is actually pretty good at taking in refugees and lowering communities in crisis. I forget what America and China does. You can probably guess what they do. But basically everybody at the table has different strengths and different weaknesses. They do say that if you play 2 players, they recommend you to be like America and China, because I think they make a more interesting dynamic. But the idea is that you can use cards to help each other at the table. And this is a purely cooperative game. For what that's worth, I've heard some criticism that this game dealing with ecological, environmental problems being portrayed as a strictly cooperative game is definitely unrealistic. I kind of wish that when you were playing cooperative, or you're playing multiplayer, excuse me, that you did have secret goals and there were tensions. Technically, everyone of the player should help everyone at all costs because everyone's in the same boat. You all win or you all lose. But honestly, that's not the way that it works, and I think that's pretty unrealistic. I wish that you had to actually barter and you had to, it's going to be a bit more pessimistic for sure. But the fact that like America is just giving up stuff to Brazil so they can fix their problems, like obviously that's just not how it's going right now. So that is one of the differences. Now, I'm also going to bring that up because when you play solo, you don't take one of the nations. You just take any board that you want, but you get these 5 solo cards and you don't get that specific flavor. Every time you play solo, you get the same setup, you get the same cards. You're not going to be like Europe, which is inherently different than US. So there's some boring elements to that, right? We're not going to be interacting with any of the stuff that deals with other players. But for that case too, all of the cards that are specifically made for cooperative multiplayer play are not in the deck of cards that we're interacting with. So we're not going to see useless cards. That means our deck is smaller. For what it's worth, there's about like 200 plus cards, I think, in the deck that we have to randomly draw through. Oh, by the way, this game is really swingy and you have to get kind of lucky. There are games that you can just lose by taking all the right choices because if the deck just doesn't give you the right cards, you lose. We'll get to that, but some problems in there for sure. Or actually, my alma mater is famous for its one diagram of climate change, reading climate stripes. Reading climate stripes. I got there, Lucille. With natural variance, it's somehow even worse because then we have to fix this man-made problem and offset huge natural variance. The rising temperatures are a crisis regardless of natural. Like, things are bad. And saying it's okay and sitting back is like definitely not the play. He says as someone who makes content on the internet. But okay, so the first thing you do, and I don't know how I feel about this, is that 2 global projects are pulled from the global project deck. These are what global projects look like. They're big cards. They're kind of like tarot style cards, and they each have basically a cost and they have an effect on them. But the cool thing is everyone around the table here has to decide which of these global projects they're going to tuck on the side of the board. And then this will be an ability that is available to everyone. This is cool. This is cooperation. The issue here to me is that we have to make one of these choices before we draw our opening hand. And a lot of these care about what cards you have in your hand, which is a total crapshoot. Now, obviously on turn 2 and turn 3, if turn 3 exists, we'll actually have to like make educated decisions. But here we're asked whether we want to have global efficiency standards or agriculture best practices. I hate these sort of choices at the beginning of games where it's just a full crapshoot. It's kind of like when you play Wingspan and then you have to do your opening hand and you get your goal before you've decided what your hand looks like. You know what I mean? Like, I don't love this sort of thing, but at least it's not a hard decision. So how this works is that it's hard to explain this before you learn the basis of the rules. A good teach would start with the game and then go back to this because that's kind of a more elegant structure. But this is basically, it says whenever a player starts a local project with that certain regulation tag, mind you, tag means it'll have that little pink thing in the top right corner, we can decrease their energy demand by 1. That's nice. That means if we're doing a lot of local regulation stuff, our demands go down. That's good. Lower demand is good. We don't need as much energy. Now, for this to be online, it requires that we have at least 3 regulation tags in at least one person's play area. Notice here we start with 1 regulation tag because one of our cards in our tableau has a regulation tag. So clearly this is not going to do anything on turn 1, but we can hope in the future if we have enough regulation tags that we'll just put things on the table and it'll decrease our demand, which means we need less energy. That is just abstractly good. Now, the best thing about this card is that it doesn't require you to do anything. It'll naturally just happen, probably organically, assuming we draw enough regulation cards. The game does come with this chart to tell you the breakdown of different type of tags, because tags are really important in this game. So regulation shows up on about 1/5 of the cards in the deck. It's not a rare tag, but you can get really rare tags, like nuclear shows up in 5% of the cards. So it's up to you to understand that. A big part of the game is this probability stuff. If you like that, you like that. Now, this other one here is rough. And this is called agricultural best practices. And it says we can ignore 1 desertification die result each round. I probably should say that desertification. Yeah, desertification sounds better. However, for this to be on, we have to tuck a card underneath it to activate, which means anyone at the player, which for solo is just us, we have to take 1 card of our hand and we have to put it underneath this thing, and then it'll be online for the rest of the game. And this basically says that this die, which we're gonna have to roll the die each round, depending on the amount of bands we put on the thermometer, anytime that it rolls a desertification, we can ignore it. Now, this is nonsense. This to me makes literally no sense. And this is, I think, why people struggle with this game and think it's maybe more interesting is because they engage with these sort of mechanics. Because these sort of mechanics don't make a lot of sense. According to me, please, if you're watching this later and you're an expert at this Daybreak and you play 200 games and you think I'm a pompous dickhead, please kindly tell me in the comments, because I think that's totally fine. I just want to explain what I'm thinking about this from what I've seen from my experience. But if I'm wrong about this, I'll eat crow, no problem. So the idea is, during the villain phase, we roll a bunch of these dice. Each die has 6 sides, it's a d6, and each of these d6s lines up to one of these 6 categories here on the side of our thermometer. Every time we roll the corresponding side, that thing moves up by 1. Now you'll notice there's certain symbols on certain of these tracks, and these are called tipping points. And so this change in weather major systems die, if I roll it and get the weather systems die, which is a 1 in 6 chance, it'll move up once. And if it moves up once, nothing happens. However, when the 5th time it moves up, we hit the tipping point. And when it hits the tipping point, a bad thing happens. And I'll tell you what the bad thing is. This one's actually really quite bad. I think it just adds 2 bands to the thermometer, which is terrible. But ask me how many times you would have to roll a d6 to exactly roll this side and then to roll this side 4 times. The number is really effing high. Like, this shit just doesn't matter. Now, some of the other ones have tipping points really early, like this one about loss of Arctic Sea. The impact is not as bad, but if we roll that once, or we roll this ice thawing permafrost, a bad thing happens quickly. But then the bad thing won't happen until we roll this die 2 more times and it hits 3rd. So this is the desertification one, and it's really bad. When we hit this, we lose a tree, and we love trees. Trees are really good for so many reasons, but we like trees. But for this to actually have an impact on the game, we have to roll this die twice, and it has to roll this. All I'm saying is spending a card from your hand, of which you only have 5, which is the resource you use to not lose the game, to tuck it under here, just so in the case that you roll this exact die at 2 times across 2 or 3 turns, is bonkers. It is such a massive poor use of resources that it makes no sense in the context that most games last 2 to 3 turns. This is what I don't understand at all. The balance of these cards is all over the place, and it's a big reason why I like global efficiency standards better than it. Well, firstly, because it's not trash, but secondly, because I don't need to tuck a card underneath it. We have 5 cards a turn. If we're lucky, we have a card draw, we have 6 or 7, and as I said in the first part, all we're gonna do is at immediate pace, as soon as possible, get black down, because the sooner we get dark energy out of our system, the sooner that we're gonna not go up the bands, and if the bands go up, the game is messed up. So spending 1 of your 5 cards to prevent a roll of this, if it happens, is ridiculous. Does that make sense? That's the way I see it. And it is absurd. It is such a waste of time. So we're going to pick this one. It's the short of the lock. And we're going to lock in the vote. Returning the planet into pudding. Too many tags gets boomed. Okay. So next up, we draw 5 cards. I don't think there's a hand size, so every round after you make that choice, which you make with no information, you draw 5 cards. And now I'll show you how the game works, because the game system is actually quite charming. I'll zoom out just a bit and we'll go here. Should we like 2 or 3 turns? No exaggeration. Doesn't make sense to build an engine. It doesn't. Galehar, how's it going? This game makes no sense. It doesn't make sense to build an engine when the game is 3 turns. It's Res Arcana, except there's 200 cards, it's full random, and bad shit can happen to you, and things can cascade terribly. I don't get it. The reason why I played 42 games of this is because most games take me 7 minutes. And if I have 20 minutes between a meeting and doing some editing or a render, I'll just play 2 games of this because it's good enough. Does it go longer at higher player counts? From my understanding, not really. Solo is probably the easiest. I think people say that it gets more difficult with higher player counts because there's just like more mental overhead. But I don't think it goes much longer than that. Like when we turned this thing on BGA said a 4-player game is 20 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe that's wrong, actually. Maybe that's because I hit solo. But like, I've played 2-player games with Pat and it's been like 15 minutes. And we're like, oh, that's that, I guess. Like I don't get it. I have very little experience at 4 players. I played it once and we built engines and it was the worst thing we could do. Okay, welcome to the cool engine part of the game, technically, or the cool card system of the game. So we start with 5 local projects. To show you how this looks when you play on the table, this is your board you have in front of you. So this player is playing as USA. So this is where you would have your communities in crisis. This is where you keep your resiliency. This is where you have all your types of dirty energy. Sorry, your dirty, I forget what they're called, the bad stuff. And this is where you have some dirty energy, some clean energy. This blue house here is the track of your energy demand. And in front of you, there's these 5 channels, which start with your 5 starting cards. This player starts with the 5 unique USA starting cards, but we're starting with the 5 solo starting cards, which are pretty agnostic and are generalist cards. How a card is structured, very cool, very clean. Mind you, these all technically have QR codes if you want to scan them and learn a bit more like social studies style, but they all basically are little functions where they have a cost and then they have an effect. Sometimes they don't have a cost, but they'll just have an effect. They'll also tell you how many times per turn you can do them. Some of them are unlimited. So to explain how this card works, there's the text, there's the lovely art, there's tags in the top right corner, which inherently don't do anything, but it's just to know that card has those tags. And then this says we can spend one of our actions on our turn, of which we have unlimited until we're done with actions. What's cool is when you play multiplayer, there's no turn order, so everybody does everything all at once, and you talk to each other, kind of plays like Model UN, like it just happens in real time, until everyone says, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done, and then you move on to the next phase. It's pretty neat. It's not a slow game on that for that merit. So scaling players doesn't actually add that much game time. Now, this says that we can discard a card, mind you, blue square is card symbol, and X means discard, so we throw it into the discard pile, to generate 1 clean energy per grid tag in this row. So this row has 1 grid tag, right? Notice we have no grid, we have 1 grid tag in hand. So if I want to play this, I can discard a card from my hand and it'll generate 1 clean energy. So that clean energy will go to this pile, which will generate more clean energy. For what it's worth, clean energy, we don't really need it this turn. We will need it technically if we get rid of some of our dirty energy, our bad energy, because then we'll be underneath the amount of required energy, our energy demand, and that will produce communities in crisis, right? So this is not something we necessarily need, but obviously this is going to be important. Now this says per tag. So the other thing you can do instead of activating a card is you can play a card. And the way that you play a card is you select a card and then you choose where to put it. You can put it either in front of any of your existing rows or you can put it behind. So we can undo. So I'm just going to do this anyways. If I confirm to put it behind here, I'm not going to hit that button. I'm pretty sure you can undo. I don't want to mess it up. There will now be 2 tags in this row, which means now if we use this action, we discard 1 card to generate 2 energy. We've doubled the efficiency. But also, we've just spent 2 cards to generate 2 energy, right? So we've doubled the efficiency, but really have we? We've only doubled the efficiency if we're going to end up doing this like at least twice, which we probably are. But do keep that in mind in the context that this game is usually 2 to 3 turns in most cases, that doubling the efficiency of this action is powerful, but it's very easy to over-evaluate. It seems like you're doing something clever, such as the cool system of this game, but that is that. Now, notably, once this card gets locked in behind here, there's no way to swap the order of the cards. There are technically some effects that force you to trash cards, which could actually open up other cards on your tableau. But all this card is basically adding icons to this row. That also is important because you'll notice some cards here have requirements. So if we want to do this nutrient management thing, this requires us to throw out a card once it's installed in our tableau. You can't play cards from, you can't do card effects from your hand. You have to put them in your tableau first and then you can do them. So once this is in the tableau, we can throw out a card from our hand to destroy one of these meat or factory farming icons, which is a bad emission we want to get rid of. However, for this to be able to be used, its row that it's in needs to have at least 3 of these plant tags. So that means if we strap it on top of the Citizens Nature Service, we'll only have 2 plant tags, which means we actually have no way of making this card do anything for us. Now that can be seen as frustrating. Of course it is. There's a huge amount of randomness in the game. If you don't draw the right cards, there's actually no way to win. You can just draw terrible cards and just straight lose. It doesn't happen very often, but there is like inherently no base game action that allows you to take down these emissions, only cards. And if you don't draw those cards, that's a problem. But you'll notice that this card is functionally useless. Now you might think I'm going to set this up and put it here and then ready and wait for next turn while I'll draw another plant tag and then I'll be ready to deal with my nutrient management. But again, figure A, the most important figure in this entire teach, is there's like 3 turns in the game, so don't do that. Everything you should do now is to bring down dirty emissions and dirty energy. Do not plan for the future. Incredibly myopic. Just go send it now at all speed. So you don't do that. If you do that and you think you're clever, you're going to lose the game. Don't be clever. Be straightforward. I'm getting reminiscent of terraforming Mars, except we're unterraforming. No, we're still terraforming. We're hyper terraforming. Okay. With that, you're basically experts at the game. Now it's just understanding what the symbols do, and the symbols are pretty straightforward. This is dirty electric phase out. It does what you think it does. So for every regulation tag in this row, we can trash a card, and we remove dirty energy equal to the amount of cards we've trashed. Sorry, to the amount of regulation icons in this row. Let me try that again. So say that we tuck another regulation card behind here. Now, if we spend an action on dirty electric phase out, we can throw out 1 card and it will clear 2 dirty energy because there's 2 regulation cards in this row. Notably, it doesn't care about the card you've discarded. That card doesn't need to have a regulation tag. That won't impact the algorithm at all, but that's how this works. So the idea is that your cards are either things to boost tags, things to become new projects you support and you put them on front, sliding the other card back so you still get its tags, or you discard them to other abilities. So that's good. Next, you have Citizens Nature Service. This card you almost never use because what this does is that this can throw out a card to generate an amount of resiliences depending on the amount of icons, the amount of, what are these called again? Tags that you have in this row. So what are resiliences? That's this number. And you'll notice the bad things that happen to us, these crises, they will say generally reduce the damage of this card per your resilience you have of that type. So currently we're going to have some global crop failures and we're going to have to take damage to our, creative, I keep forgetting the names of things, communities and crises equal to the amount of bands on the thermometer. However, for every resilience we have, we will reduce that damage by 1. So our goal is only to get 1 band on the thermometer, which is very doable, which means that we'll only take 1 damage. And because we have 1 community in crisis, we will ignore that community in crisis. So it's actually not really worth supporting this because generally you can win the game with 1 resilience as long as you're trying to win the game on turn 2 or turn 3. There are some cool engines that actually use your resiliences to push you forward. There's some actually really interesting engines that can randomly show up. You can't really get them. You just have to actually luckily get them that actually make these slightly more interesting. Now, notably too, there are some crisis cards that will just say you lose resiliencies, and that also sucks. And if you get them in the bad order, a bad situation can become a terrible situation. So you could say that, well, then Andre, we should invest in this sort of shit, but I don't think we should because our cards can just be spent bringing down the bad energy stuff and the bad emission stuff, and that will get us closer to a winning game in 2 to 3 turns, which we're going to do at all costs. This is a very useful card. We're lucky we start with this. Now notice a bunch of cards actually have this limit at the bottom, and limit will tell you how often you can activate this card. Notably, Dirty Electric Phase Out, you can do as many times as you want, as long as you have cards in hand to fulfill it. However, there's a lot of cards that say once per round or limit each round per the amount of a certain tag in that column. So because we have one of these innovation tags, we can do this once, but if we tucked another innovation card behind it, we could do this again, and it'll just keep track. That's what this number is. We've done it 0 out of 1 times. Same with this card. This card actually technically does nothing. It uses these energy tags, and if there's at least 2 or 3 here, we can at least draw a card, which basically means we trade 1 card into 1 card, which is fine. If there's a card in our hand we don't want, we'll just push it forward. That tracks. Let's try and play the game. Let me move my face so it doesn't cover a card. I guess I'm going to cover the world. All right, now we take our breath and we think about what we're going to do here. So our goals are to bring down gray by all costs. Now you notice all the ways that bring down emissions are pretty hard. They're pretty difficult. So this district heating is really good. Once per round, we can bring down one of our apartments, our housing, which is good. It's important. However, it needs 2 of these grid tags, which means if we put on top of our clean electricity plants, we won't have a way to create clean energy. So this is not a great thing to do. That being said, we can tuck this behind here, and then we have that double stack of energy creating. So our energy is twice as efficient at creating clean energy, but we've also ended up spending 2 cards to create 2 energy, which is not that much better than just throwing this out to this twice. This card requires us to have 2 of these society tags for it to work. It's twice as efficient as the Dirty Electric phase out, but this is the math where it's like, if I get this on top of, if I spend 2 cards to make this thing work, I could have just done this twice anyways, right? So if I put this card down and then I put another card down behind it, like financial risk regulation, in theory, that could be a bit better because then we spend 3 cards to get rid of all our dirty energy. But if that's the case, we're going to have a problem where we're not making enough clean energy. That actually might be the play this turn, that we could do something like that. But generally, if you spend a card to get slightly more efficiency, because we're not a true engine builder game, like we only have to get rid of 6 dirty energy. You don't gain more dirty energy. Efficiencies actually do kind of plateau at a certain point. This, we're not going to be able to play at all. The tags are not terrible. The leaf tag is like not super useful. This innovation tag is kind of nice because we can do clean energy R&D again. But I think we're going to get rid of this first to find another card. And this card is also very similar to this card. It's actually worse than this card. This is draw 5, keep 1. This is draw 3, keep 1. So we're probably going to take this energy tag and just put it under clean draw energy and draw a card and call it a cantrip and be happy from there. Hey, Sieg, my partner and I are obsessed with Daybreak. How have you been enjoying it? I'm so sorry. I really don't care for this game much. I played like 40 games of it, and I think the game is pretty flawed. That's kind of what the stream is, where I think the game is over in 2 to 3 turns just about every time, and you're really disincentivized to do engine building, and the punishments scale so absurdly that an ounce of myopic, full forward, just get rid of all emissions now is worth any future planning. I feel like just this system is so clever and so clean and so simple, but then this part of the game doesn't make sense with it. So I'm not as optimistic, and I'm doing this stream to show some of the issues we're running into. For requirements, you count all tags, only the ones in the same lane. Only the ones in the same lane. Super, super important. So if this needs a certain amount of these society tags, they all need to be in the same lane where fossil fuel nationalization is. Now, notably, this card that we picked, the Global Efficiency Standard, says we need 3 tags in at least one player's play area. So that will be the whole play area. If this gets turned on, we're not going to worry about this. If it happens, it happens. But yeah, otherwise, they have to be in the same line. That's where the planning is. Oh, hey, the friend who bought Daybreak from you are coming over today. I'll not show them this video. I honestly hope they have a good time with Daybreak. Like, clearly, I'm the one person I've heard who has these problems with the game. Pat, I think you agree with me slightly, but I don't want to put words into your mouth. But this game did really well. Like, critically, it did really well in terms of reviews and online presence. Like, I just don't get it at all. So I'm clearly the weird one here. Maybe by game 40, we'll get to the same place. The problem is that I got to that same place on game 4. Like after game 2, game 3, where I was like, oh, I won on 2 turns. Am I doing the rules wrong? And then I looked at the rules and I was doing them right. And then I showed with Maddie and I was like, hey, actually ignore all of those things and just get your black down, get your emissions down. And then she was like, oh yeah, that worked really easily. I'm like, yeah, it's turn 3, game's over. And then we were both like, this isn't great, is it? And then I just keep playing more of it because it's on BGA and it takes 7 minutes and render time sometimes takes some time. We'd love to see a list review of your favorite board games. Hey, that might be an interesting thing. It's wild that this is more depressing than a life or death struggle with giant mega corporations we usually get on the main channel. Yeah, weird how that is, huh? It's because we all live here. We'll win though. We'll fix the environment. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. It's super easy to fix. We just need 2 turns to fix the environment. All right, so I'm gonna get rid of this card. So we're gonna click it, and then we'll throw out a card to draw 5, keep 1, and that's good. We want to do this sooner than later so we can see our options. And now we have to look at 5 cards. So this one on the left, there's a whole bunch of cards like this. They're R&D cards, and they're very frustrating because it's full variance all the time. So if we put this on front of one of our cards and activate it, we draw 8 cards. However, we only keep each card that either has a wind or an innovation tag. What's the chance of that? I don't know. I could look at the numbers. Wind is like what? Wind is 8%, innovation's 11%. So we're looking at 19%. However, some of those cards are overlapping and have the same tag. So the number has a couple false positives. How big is the deck? I don't know. It doesn't tell me. So like these cards sometimes draw you 0 and you hate yourself. Sometimes it draws 4. I feel like that's just a ridiculous amount of variance in a game where like your card economy is so tight, but this is a fine card to play, it turns out. This says recovery investments, spend a card to reduce a community in crisis by any one player. This is so unbelievably bad. Now, when you're playing multiplayer, maybe your community, maybe your whole country is perfect and you have no problems, but other people have problems, then this becomes something. But spending this card, installing it, and then spending another card from your hand just to reduce this by 1 is a ridiculous ridiculous use of resources where inherently every resource can bring down basically one of the bad things by one. This is so absurd to me, and there is just so many cards in this game that make no sense, like mechanically make no sense in the context of how this game works. Again, the game is over in 2 turns, 3 turns. Why are you playing this? So laughable. If anything, you look at the tags and think if you can use these tags. This card's not bad. It has a wind icon. It's an energy generator. It's the same as this. It requires a grid icon, which we'll have, but if we put it there, it will spend a card to generate 2, which is the same as now we're spending 2 cards to generate 2. So at some point, whatever. In theory, this also doesn't have a grid tag. It's a bit awkward. This, just as bad as recovery investments. Spend a card to remove this. Don't do that. And then solar R&D, which is the same, but for instead of wind, it's this. What do you think we're taking? If only we can fix environment in 2 turns. The 3-card clear all dirty energy play does also turn on the big project that you picked on turn 1. Yeah, it does. And that's actually kind of good. What's important about this is that it's when you support the card. So the pink card you play from that on has to be in the front row. So it will hit it. Also, the 3rd card turns this on, but it doesn't activate it, which is frustrating. But this is just the sort of thing that will happen at some point. But I think getting rid of the dirty, and then we just have to get like our play this round based off of what we've randomly drawn, which for some people is exciting, and what we got here. Our goal is probably to get down as much dirty energy as we can, and then run a bit of an energy deficit and get up as much clean energy as we can. We clearly have no good way of removing any of our emissions, so we're just hoping next turn we draw into emission removal. Turns out we might not sometimes, right? Like that's an issue with the game, is that emissions is entirely the luck of the deck. So that sucks. Daybreak is more depressing than Netrunner because in Daybreak no one is playing the environmental catastrophe. I agree. Would love to have more board game thoughts. If you've been enjoying Beneath Arrest, I wonder if Slay Spire board game would be your jam. Zeke, I played it once, but only online. Like I had to play it on TTS during some downtime. But I think it's a surprisingly charming implementation of Slay the Spire, which is a game I've played a lot of. I need to play it in person, but I have so many friends who have it and enjoyed the heck out of it, and it's nice. It's actually, they did a really good job adapting it. That's for sure. Okay, so what are we deciding that we want to take here? My guess is we probably take one of these cards. We have to figure out if there's anything smart here to do with energy. So what is our play? We're going to have one more cantrip card here because we're going to trade our clean energy R&D just to draw a card, and that'll be whatever. With this card, we're just not going to use because it's trash. And so if we do Tuck Tuck here, then we'll be able to throw out 1, and that'll clear a couple energy. That will clear, that'll clear a lot. That'll clear all our dirty energy. And then we can just throw out, yeah, I think we just clear as much dirty as we can and do as much electricity plants as we can. So the question is, how do we generate the most clean electricity? If we do this, we're 2 cards to generate 2, which is at least the baseline of what we're expected to do, but it will scale up better if we do it at least once more. Because then we spend 3 cards to generate 4, as opposed to 3 cards to generate 3. Holy shit, it's so dire. The engine building in this game is not that good when the game is 3 turns. But yeah, this looks like it's going to be 3 for 4. So I'll just take this. Per wind farm, and we have 1 wind farm, 1 wind farm. This becomes useless though, actually. That's the issue, is that we'll just throw it out. Yeah, that's fine. So we'll keep this. Again, you can undo, which is great. So until you do a choice that reveals you new cards from the board, you can always undo 1 action, which is quite kind. So now I'm going to just cycle this behind here, and so that we have it 2 cards. So once per turn, we can draw a card. Oh, fuck. Now we have to talk about this kind of card. So this is a rare kind of card called Geoengineering, and it rolls this die called the Geoengineering die, and the outputs are kind of random. Geoengineering is the kind of in this game portrayed as like arcane magic that has some costs. It's like you're playing Arkham Horror, and then it's like, do that spell, read the back, something bad happens to your Mansion of Madness. So you need a lot of these cards because they scale with how many geoengineering tags you have in this row. You roll the geoengineering die, which is just a d6, and then you add 1 per geoengineering tag. If you roll 2 or 4, you add a water to the board, which is nice because every water, again, reduces the carbon we take for every turn going forward. That's functionally not that different than reducing your emissions, but don't worry about it. And then you have to reduce 2 resiliency to ecological stuff, or if you just roll good, it can sometimes be a benefit. These cards are ridiculous. I've never seen them do anything good. Again, if you really are behind, you can try and shoot the moon. But because these cards show up on tags, or sorry, these tags only show up on cards that only do these things, they are so bad. They're just really, really bad. You generally don't do anything with them. You just throw them out to other costs because using this card is such a high cost because you have to spend like 2 or 3 cards to make this a tempo positive card. And that just doesn't make sense in the engine building. There's a whole bunch of these that do real ridiculous things like cloud seeding, where you can roll a die, can decrease the temperature temporarily, and then it comes back. Like they do weird stuff that are probably scientifically quite interesting, but mechanically they're pretty bad. They're very, very quite bad. All right. So now we're going to tuck this in here. We're going to tuck this in here. Oops, misclicked. We'll tuck this in front. So now we've had turned this on, which is good. You see, it says it's active. So anytime that we support a regulation tag, we reduce our demand for energy, which is good. Do you think the inefficiency of certain kind of cards is a commentary? Yeah, I think it could be. It's weird that like this, I wouldn't say pseudo, like the weird science is, but like, I think the tone of this game is so hyper positive all the time that I'm not sure if we're coming to that. Like maybe this is just a crapshoot and they don't know if it works or not. So they wanted to portray it like this. Like it's not a consistent strategy, but it could work out, or it's unknown science. So you have to roll the die on it. That's kind of more my read. Or say geothermy balanced by the assumption it could absorb black for 6 rounds. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think we're going to run an energy deficit. How bad is our energy deficit? Because if we do this, we remove all our dark energy. And then we're at energy. Oh, this is actually too far. I think this is too much. Because if we do this, we got our energy down to 0, which is not great. Because then we run an energy deficit of 6. And then the most energy we can do is if we tuck this behind here, we can generate 2, 4. So we run a 2 energy deficit. I think we can afford to do that. Oh no, because we need a card to use for this. So if that's the case, I think we just don't give a shit. This is the hard thing, right? So if you're picking up what I'm putting down. If we throw a card to this, we remove 6 dirty energy. It's not up to 6, it is 6 because we put 3 cards there on the 3 tags. In theory, we did this in the worst order, so we can't undo taking this back. So we're kind of cornered. Now, as soon as we remove all our dirty energy, the only other way that we can win the game is by removing our emissions, which is entirely random based off the cards you draw. So there's a chance we just draw no emissions cards and we're cooked. Or adding more trees and water to the world, which is also rare. It shows up on a couple cards, but it's not common. As you saw, we've seen almost none of them besides this card, which is bizarre. So that's not good. Because if we hit this button and we bring this down to 0, not only are we running a 6 energy deficit, which is an 8 energy deficit next turn, but if we don't draw the right cards, we got nothing going on. So we're just hoping that we draw well next turn. Now, again, we could tuck this back here and throw out 2, throw out 4. I think we just did this in the wrong order. I think we want to only remove 4 dark energy. Now, if we run a deficit, we run a pretty bad deficit, and then we actually end up minus on cards. So we actually goofed it. I can't undo this. That's bad. Play onshore warrants, discard heating to onshore winds, discard ocean fertilization for fossil fuel nationalization. Carbon's going to kill us. You're fine. Play onshore winds. Play onshore winds. Yeah, discard district heating to onshore winds and discard ocean fertilization for fossil fuel. Yeah, we run a deficit there. So I just did this in the wrong order. I probably should fire fossil fuel when there's only 2 tags there, not 4 tags. I think 4 tags is just too much. So we unfortunately are just going to run a deficit, because if we do that, we go down to 6, 0 energy. If we put onshore winds on top of this, it'll generate 1 per wind, which will have 2 wind, and then we'll produce 2 energy. So we'll be at 5 dirty, 0 clean. We'll run a deficit of 4, which means we hit -1 hand size. So we goofed it. We goofed it. This is an easy thing to fix in person, but not on paper, because we needed to put this. We needed to basically not put this card in, because once we have this card in, we're taking away too much dark energy. We had to be like a bit calm about it. Oh, actually, no. Technically, we would, because we can't even use it. We're just gonna run a deficit. I don't care. I think we have to run a deficit here. So we'll get rid of this. We'll get rid of all our dark energy. So now this row is useless. Now you notice that we have an energy deficit. How bad is the penalty of running a deficit of 2? I think we're running a deficit of 4, though. 4 means that we have to add 4 charts here for communities in crisis. And that means we'll start next turn with -1 hand size. It's bad. It's not good for us. So here we can tuck this. And then we fire it once. So we're at a deficit of 4. And this is what I mean. Your cards are so valuable. Every card here was worth -2 dark energy or +2 dark energy. And you want me to spend a card so I can not roll this tree dice twice, let alone a card with a certain tag. Like, it makes no sense. And then we're going to end our turn. Unfortunately, we run a 4 deficit, so our people are going to be angry at us. I think it's fine, because we're down to net 4 carbon emissions. So if all we do is figure out how to remove 4 of these next round, which is kind of difficult, we'll win the game. We just have to draw well. All right, so we take 4 communities in crisis because we're over from our failing energy demands. Yeah, that's on us. We generate carbon, so you notice we generate 14 carbon here, and 10 gets sequestered. Where they go doesn't really matter. And the errant carbon hits here. Now, 4 is actually really good because we don't even fill in a band. Wait, this is sick. We don't fill in a band because the 5th carbon fills the band, so none of these crisis cards are going to do anything. Because this says that we would take 1 commuting crisis per band, which would be reduced by our 1 resilience, but because there's no bands, we don't do anything. Notably, we also didn't roll the die. So we did a gambit where we just said we're going to have no carbon this round, and so these crisis cards probably don't hurt us. Same thing, water pollution. This targets technically the player that has the most factories, which for solo is always us, and we would take 1 community crisis per band we have, but we have no bands. Same thing, water insecurity. Notice how these cards either do a lot or do nothing. Win in 2 turns. Now we have 11. Okay. Shit, these are bad. So now we basically went through 1 round. We're on round 2. Our first global project here is when a player takes a local action that removes any amount of dirty energy, they can remove as many as they like. We have to tuck a card underneath this for this to work, but clearly we have no dirty energy, so this is useless. So instead, we're going to pick this card, which is also quite bad. It says once per round, as long as we've tucked one of these, what are they called? Pink cards underneath here, we can reduce the effect of something that will challenge our social resilience. We're not going to do that. It's useless. And now we have to draw good cards here or we're cooked. All right, this is bad. Notice how we drew no cards that will able... Oh, this one actually can. Oh, that's so bad, though. This is 2 cards from our hand to reduce our demand by 1 and remove 1 wild emission type. So we're cooked. We're in a bad spot. We can always just like get through this turn by generating a lot of energy, but this is not good for us. It is just not going to be good for us because we have no way to enact a win condition because our win condition is attached to cards from the deck we have to randomly draw. So what are we going to do? We can draw 5, keep 1. That's fine. Discard 1, draw 5. That's great. This card requires 3 grid icons, which we don't need. If we tuck it underneath here, we end into the same problem, where if we tuck it underneath here and then hit this button, we spend 2 cards to gain 3 energy, where we could just spend 2 cards here to get 4 energy. You see how the engine building doesn't make a lot of sense? If I'm not mistaken, if we tuck this underneath here, and then we hit this button, we generate 3 energy, which again, we've spent 2 cards to generate 3 energy. But if we don't tuck it, we can spend 2 cards to make 4 energy. Oofa doofa. This card we can just play to draw a card, which we probably will. We don't need the tag. I don't think we're going to put more energy icons under here, so we can just draw a card. Okay, this is good. This is what we wanted. This increases our demand, but it reduces our houses, apartment emissions. Unfortunately, we only have 2 apartment emissions, so we can't win the game. We can add 2 more emissions, but this is probably the next thing we have to do, and we can put it here and do it twice. Our biggest problem here is energy. So I think all we need to do is get our energy up, because if we get our energy up, we're running a massive deficit. So we can fix the deficit, but the deficit will be impacted as well by this thing, electrify everything. Also, when we put this on the table, it will decrease our demand, which is good because we hit this global efficiency standards thing. So I think we're just going to go ahead and this card is silly. We'll just get rid of this to draw. We don't need the tags. Andre, is your application to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources? I'm going to send them a gameplay video where I win in 2 turns and they'll be like, whoa, this guy. Oh, this is good. How's it going, by the way, Solar? This card's not bad. So we have a couple cards here that are good. This one increases our demand by 1 to get rid of a factory, but we already have a way to get rid of... Oh, no. Well, we have this way to get a factory. It's only once per round, but like that's fine. It's 1 card. This increases our demand, but we can do it once per pink, which is also pretty good. So in theory, we can reduce 4 factories and 1 building, and we could win this round. This could be a 2-turn game. So if we put this in pink, we fire this 4 times. Our demand is now 15 energy. We have no more factories in our magnificent Canada. Then we can strap on this card and then increase our demand by 2. And then we remove all the houses. And at that point, this emissions will be 8. And then we'll be running a deficit and we'll hit drawdown. The problem is we increase our demand by 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll be at 15 demand. We'll be generating 5 energy. I think we're fine. And we just do every other card on the table to feed the wind power. I think we win in 2 turns. Yeah, it seems funny too. Also, every time we play this, it decreases our demand, which is good. So I'm going to just do this and see how far we can get. So this decreases our demand by 1. So it goes down to 10. And then we can increase our demand by 1 to remove a factory. And we can decrease our demand by 1 to remove a factory. Don't care about the consequences of your action. Your country's falling apart, but it's okay. This game can be multiplayer where other players control other nations. What's the player cap? Up to 4. It's 1 to 4. And everybody actually plays a nation with its own strengths and weaknesses. So like you have to play US, China, Europe, and the rest of the developing world. And that's kind of interesting. But when you play solo, you just play imaginary nation that starts with the same 5 cards that are not super thematic. All right, so now we're producing 10 emissions. So as long as we reduce our emissions by 1, we will win the game as long as we survive drawdown, which the only way we can lose here is if we have too many communities in crisis, which we could. I didn't do the math. I should have done the math. But now we have 14 demand, but notice we're making 9 emissions, and we have 10 ways to sequester carbon, so our net carbon is -1. That will actually eat carbon off of the thermometer. So now all I'm going to do, because we don't want to be over by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or we'll lose. So we're just going to dump everything into energy. It's going to be close. So we run a deficit of 3, we're fine. That's a 2-turn game. What the hell am I meant to do engine building in a 2-turn game? So we get 3 from failing energy demand. Okay. Notice we also have no bans. And if we have no bans, these cards can't hurt us. Notice how now it's going to pull them off of the band. And it technically would actually unreveal bans if bans were going to be eaten. And we've achieved drawdown. So all we need to do is survive the rest of the crisis phase. So food security has no effect because it's 1 per band. This card has no effect because it's 1 per band. This card says lose 1 social resilience. So we lose 1 social resilience. If we had no social resilience to lose, we would lose. We would add a community crisis. We win the game. It's a good adaptation. I'll give it that, BGA. But that's the game. It was 2 turns. Did the thing we do at the end, is it kind of funny that we dumped everything into removing the factories at any costs? Yeah, it is kind of funny. But like, this is what I don't get. That was 53 minutes because we would teach. But if I played that solo, that's a 5-minute game. Short-sighted strategy wins. Is that the political message of the game? I can't believe that's the political message because that's a nonsense political message. Short-sighted at all costs, just push yourself forward because the game snowballs so bad if you let the bands go up. Don't let the bands go out. 2 turns but 53 minutes, yeah, but I was doing a rules teach throughout all that. SRN, are there no difficulty settings? There are difficulty settings. The difficulty settings add little bars or the little challenge cards. You can add hard challenge cards or you can add challenge cards that actually ameliorate the game. So last time I did this, I added a hard challenge card and all the hard challenge card said is like your demand goes up +1 every round. So instead of going up 2, it goes up 3. So there's small things like that. It'll be like, oh, you get 1 dirty energy a turn. Which like would matter because if we did that, we wouldn't have won this turn, but it's not like you have to really change your strategy. It's just like numbers slightly go up. It will not impact the math behind the failure of engine building in an engine building looking game. This game looks like an engine builder. I have no doubt everyone who sits down builds like a 5-tile column and they'll be like, I'll fire this 4 times and it'll give me +8 energy. It just doesn't make any sense. Based on all the engineering cards and thermometer size, obviously it's the optimal way to play, but it feels very unintended. I think that's a problem. Is like, I play this like a nerd. And if you play this like a nerd, the game collapses inwards. But I think if you play this game on vibes and what seems to be the intention, it's probably a challenging and maybe even a fun game. But I play this as like a way to shoot 6 minutes on the internet. Probably easier when you control all the relevant nations doing stuff. Yeah, I think from what I read online that solo seems easier, but in 2 players is the same thing. Like I remember getting not an argument, but like there was this big turning point when I was playing with Pat. There was like a crisis that hit the table and the crisis said that we can no longer deal with other crises unless we each tuck a card underneath it. And Pat was like, oh, we should really talk about that. And my response was, no, Pat, we're not spending 2 cards to be able to deal with other cards, right? Like if we spend 2 cards to destroy this crisis that says we can't deal with other crises, we're basically saying we want to get rid of 3 cards because most other crises require you to spend cards. And the answer is in a 2 to 3 turn game, should I spend 3 cards to do nothing? No. Let's run it back. When you gloss over all the flavor of the cards and play the mechanics, is probably less interesting. Yeah, like the thing too is like all the cards are really, again, well researched, well thought out. And there's this beautiful thing where you can explore the cards and it'll tell you like, what is peatland rewetting? And it'll give you like the social studies response. Mind you, all these cards are QR coded, so you can scan it trivially. It's also really nice that it gives you like explanation of how to take action. Like this is hella sick. This game has some really cool shit going on. I wish all games, whether or not they were, social studies type games, had an FAQ that I could scan. Maybe not on the card. I think QR codes look ugly, but you know what I mean? Like, I love this, that there's a page that explains what the text says. That's awesome. It has like Oracle text. But there's also a lot of cards that just do the same thing. Like there's maybe 2 or 3 cards that have the same effect, but they have different art and they have different text. So yeah, sometimes it just becomes like, I'm just looking for a thing that brings down Car. And that's obviously what it comes down to when you win by finding the thing that brings down Car. All right, let's just do one more. I think maybe another. We have 10 minutes. Yeah, I think they say it's a 20-minute game though. Like this is what I don't understand. Is this per player count? Is this per player count? Let's change the number of players to 4, see if the player count comes up. No, it's a 20-minute game. And again, the time of the game doesn't change based off of the amount of players because you do your turns at the same time. Now that being said, like there's no turn order. That means that the game will slow down because there's like conversations. There's a bunch of cards that show up at bigger player counts that say like you can trade cards between people. But if I spend a card to trade a card, I'm -2 cards. And based off of, again, figure A, which is do everything as quickly as possible, myopically as possible, that doesn't make sense. Again, everything can be calculated as this is 1 card to do bad -2. This is 2 cards to do bad -3, and all you have to do is bring bad down as fast as possible. Maybe that's how you need to approach the game, as a social studies project, as a final project rather than a serious commercial board game. Yeah, and I think that's exactly why it also did really well, is that this is a theme, the way that's produced, the way it's presented, the way that's sustainably made. Like, there is so much so good with this game. The problem is the game. The game is not that good. Oh man, I don't get it. But like, it's an important game, and if it gets people engaged with the topics in a serious way, and people are looking into these things and actually writing their government about peat bog wetlanding stuff, like 10 out of 10, sign me up every time. I just don't think it's always that case. All right, let's just do a vanilla one again. All right, we have to make a decision. Either we can tuck a card underneath this to deny the abilities that will interact with our negative infrastructure resilience. Of course, we're not going to take that. So instead, we're going to wildly take this, assuming that we get lucky and get 3 solar tiles. Great. What are your thoughts on Pandemic? For me, it was definitely more does not play games this way. It's very difficult and imparts the dire feeling we're going for. Pandemic feels worse. Like, for what it's worth, like, in terms of gameplay, Pandemic instills dread in a really exciting way. Like, you can retheme Pandemic to a horror board game, and it would exist. Because bad things cascade. And for what's worth, bad things cascade in this game too, in a way that we did not experience because we never got our first temperature band. But that is the big thing. Oh, fuck. Okay, good. We got to talk about forest fires, the worst encounter card of all time. But like, bad things also cascade, but it's not frightening. It's just random bullshit go. The thing with Pandemic is that the city deck, and mind you, it's been a while since I've played, shuffles the cards that you've seen and they go back on top of the deck in an order. So you know Baghdad showed up a while ago, it's going to show up again. And so then you're doing the calculations to be like, I can't get to Baghdad this turn to prevent an outbreak. So we're running, it's like a 1 in 5 chance. And I like that tension. I think that actually does produce cool stories. So I like that a fair bit more. That feels dire mechanically. This feels dire because we have an understanding that it's really hot out comparative to what it was 2 years ago. And that is going to be a problem for everyone all the time, right? Like, the Pandemic theme was probably a bit more dire 4 years ago than it is now, but maybe that's not exactly true. But you know what I mean? Like, I feel like everyone's a bit more just anxious about this shit. Because, yeah. Trying to fix things? Absolutely not. What I'm hearing is the game needs to model the political consequences of climate skeptic fascism causing you to be unelected and lose if you do anything too sudden and aggressive. Yes. I also do not like the fact that the way that it portrays cooperation between nations is entirely naively optimistic, where they will trade at all costs. And like, I wish that this game somewhat had, and that obviously is clearly not the tone, like something like New Angeles, where you have hidden goals, or there's somebody, like some friction between cooperation where you have to make it make sense. Because unfortunately, currently we live in a you have to make it make sense system on different fronts. Forest fire is the worst crisis is like objectively not true, but it's a funny sentence. So check this out. There's like 2 or 3 of these in this deck, and this is like so much fucking worse than every other damn crisis card in the deck. And it's maybe that's important, right? Like, forest fires hella suck, obviously. And what it does is that per every temperature band we get, we lose a tree, and then it adds a carbon for every tree we lost. So not only do we go down our win condition for the next couple turns, which, mind you, if the game is only 2 or 3 turns, but then we have to go up on the problems associated with it. And this can be reduced per ecological resilience. So actually on turn 1, there's a chance this won't do anything. But if you ever say get 2 bands on turn 1, heaven forbid, and then draw this, you now suddenly have 4 trees and 2 more carbon to deal with. Like, this game kicks you for being behind. Like if you fall slightly behind, again, don't engine build, the game punches you so hard where it's like, oh, sorry, now you don't have trees and you have more carbon. Oh, and now because you have bans, all the crises are hitting you harder. Like this is the overarching problem I find with this game where like engine building doesn't make sense because just staying in front of everything myopically is like the most important thing. Pandemic rethemed to a horror board game does exist. It's called the Eldritch Horror Board Game set in the FFG Arkham setting. Oh, for real? I'm pretty sure they did other pandemics that are like not disease related, right? Like the Rome ones, and there's a Cthulhu one. There's a Lovecraft pandemic, I'm pretty sure. The dismissing of internation tensions is missing is a very big point of the game. Yeah, and like for what it's worth, I think the game didn't want to portray that. It didn't want to be a politics game. It wanted to be let's look at the green in the background of these art cards, which is like, it's good, it's fine. For a lot of people, that's what they wanted from this game. A nice little sit down, have your coffee, have a solo puzzle, or hang out with your friends and like have a positive way to interact with environmental change. Not like I'm going to argue US versus China about how they're going to deal with their factory problem and I don't want to give them chips, right? Like, yeah. All right, let's talk about this hand. All right, so our startings is the same. You can't randomize that when you're playing solo. So let's see our options. So one per infrastructure. Checking the name. Infrastructure. Oh, nailed it. We can reduce our cars, which is important. However, we have to increase our demand. So this is definitely doable if we can get our energy up. Notice off the top, we have no grid tags. So in our hand has no good way of generating more electricity. This is just, again, how the game works. We were lucky that we drew cards on our second 4-card hand that allowed us to close the game, but you can just draw bad hands. Luckily, you have ways to deal with it. Again, you have clean energy R&D and clean energy investments, but it is a problem. This is a garbage card. We can take things from players, take away these things that don't really matter, these community crises. It doesn't at least take a card, but we can only do it once and it takes the card itself. So this is just not worth it. This is great. Removing a factory once per round. That means we'll take a factory out this turn and factory out next turn, which is fine. That is ultimately our win condition. This is -2 for a single card. That's just good. Again, we want to look at this game as minuses per card. This is -2 for a card. That's fine. This we can use once per round. Oh, per energy icon. So this doesn't line up well. This is also really cursed. We don't have any energy icons, so this card is dead. This card is only good if we have other energy icons and we don't, so this card is useless. So we could put this here and then it's just one card for -1 energy. Technically one card for -1 energy next round too, which it's okay. And then this says, whenever you take an action that adds +2 green energy, which we cannot do, you may reduce energy by 1. So this is what I mean, where you can get a hand like this and it can just stink. Like there's not much we can do with this hand to push ourselves forward quickly because we can't interact with this. The best thing we have here is we can do clean energy R&D and we can throw out our worst card and hope for the best. And think our worst card here by a mile is scale up recovery support. It has a single tag, which we don't really need. So we're just going to throw this out and hope for something better. Looking at 5 cards, it's likely we find something that makes this hand work, but we might not. Cozy, not a politics game about implementing policies to move towards a greener earth. Yeah, to stop yourself cooking to the forest fires. Like it's such a weird mixed sentence. My big pandemic regret is that we played one session of Legacy with 2 roommates who fell out with real bad. Now we can't go back in. With one session, Brennan, you can replace them. I did, for what it's worth, one time at work. I had a friend at lunch who were like, I want to run a Pandemic Legacy season. I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And then they ended up finding a time slot that didn't work for me. And so they're like, we're doing it without you. And I was like, I guess that's the reality of how humans work. And then one time, one person couldn't make it in because they were sick for the day. And so I was asked, can you sit in on that session? And so I did, kind of begrudgingly, but I basically got to play one round as somebody else's shoes. And like, you can pick it up. It's not that big of a deal. You played one session, you'll be fine. All right, so what are we picking here? This requires 2 eco tags, and it is a great way to get rid of dirty energy. That is fine. However, the 2 eco tags doesn't line up well with its scaling off of this pink thing, whatever it's called, regulation, I think. Yeah, regulation. All right, this one's also not bad. Circular economy. However, it needs a lot of tags, but it is -1 emission per type per turn, which is pretty good. We could knock it off on top of dirty electric phase out, but then we're crushing our way to get rid of dirty energy. And dirty energy is a thing we definitely want to get rid of quickly. All right, small scale onshore wind. This is once per round, but it doesn't require a card, which is honestly a reasonable trade-off. The thing is that this requires 2 grid. It's totally useless. This is city greening. It's totally useless unless we want the tags, because that is just a butt ability. And then this is the same thing. It's a butt ability. This is what I mean too. Like the idea of city greening is kind of interesting. The city of green building code's super interesting as well. But mechanically the cards aren't interesting. And that just happens the more you play this game, where I just look at these texts and I don't look at the ideas. And that's maybe a problem with me. I'll say it's a problem with me. I did like 5 sessions Pandemic Legacy Season 0 with one of my exes like 6 years ago. Haven't touched it since. Oof. Oofa doofa. We've played like maybe 60% of whatever that King's... What's that game where you play as different houses and you're all like the King's hand and you're talking to them and there's the charts and stuff? We never finished it because the pandemic happened. That game was really, really cool. King's Dilemma? King's Dilemma. That was sick. Cool game. I played that with Pat and some other friends. It was really quite nice. Okay, what are we doing? So these are garbage. This is okay. This is not very good, but it's technically doable. We could drop it in here and then just spend 2 cards to get down 2 energy. That's the same as doing this twice, so it doesn't seem fantastic. This is once per energy, so we can do that on there, which kind of sucks. We could also just go for a cantrip and say that all these cards are of comparable ass, that we can just put this behind clean energy investments and invest in it, which is not that bad. I think the best thing we could get is maybe a grid icon, because we can just like, we have one way to get rid of dirty. We have one way to get rid of factories. We'll eventually do this. This is no good. But this actually does something. This is not bad as soon as we can get a way to get 2 energy. Like, this is kind of a cool card, right? I think the math behind it in a non-engine building world doesn't make a lot of sense to transition out of green energy, but it at least means that this is a card that you don't have to pitch cards to that will passively remove dirty electric, which is fine. That's fine. Imagine having your campaign of Pandemic Legacy get interrupted in 2020 by the global pandemic. No, you're still allowed to play at that point. You're technically doing research. Okay, so do we have any way to generate more than 2 electricity? We technically do, but the small scale onshore wind. However, we can't play this because it requires 2 grid tags, and we have no way of doing that. So I'm just going to get on this, and I'm going to pitch it to clean energy investments. If this fails, we'll still just have clean energy investments here, which we can draw a card next round. Soft engine building. Definitely can't imagine that. No, behind. Excuse me. Confirm. Oh, that's good. That's something. So we can play this. Notice how there's like crap shooting off the top of the deck. That happens. So if we play this here, it's 2 cards for 2 energy. However, if we play with this, it's 2 cards. It's 3 cards for 2 energy up, 1 energy down. I'll take it. So we play this, we use this. So this is going to go here for sure. We're definitely going to do this because it has no consequence. So we're already producing 19. The most important thing you can do on round 1, hopefully this is not a surprise, is get rid of 1 carbon. Because as soon as you get 1 carbon, you only enter 19. And if you enter 19, you only do 1 band and 4 more. You still should do as much as you can. But if you do 20 and you don't touch your carbon emissions for some reason, you just like generate energy and like generate resiliences like a weirdo, you'll hit 2 bands immediately and then everything scales really poorly. Like we can eat 1 band because it's reduced per 1 resilience, but as soon as you hit 2 bands, the game is cooked. So just don't hit 2 bands. It's really, really important that you hit 20. We'd never rolled the die last game because we just never hit a band. I think Pandemic and that one movie Contagion got a lot more engagement during the pandemic, funny enough. I think Contagion was like one of the most watched films on Netflix for a while. I don't know what it's about, I'm assuming, but it did gangbusters during the pandemic. Okay, what are we doing here? So we'll probably tuck this in here. Sorry, we'll support this on top of that. Then we can throw out... We need to get rid of our dirty energy. If we just do this, it removes 2, so we might just do this on top. Yeah, so we can get 2 energy in, 1 dirty energy. I don't like this start. So then we can make 2, which now we can use green energy transitions to -1, which we will. So we have a surplus of energy. We're now on, what is it, 18 emissions. And then we'll just put this on top of, like, either we can use this here to -2. Like, this is where it gets so goofy, is that we can use this card to -1 dirty, or we can throw it to the onshore wind to get -1 dirty and +2 clean. Like, you tell me what the math makes sense. All right, so we're at 17 emissions, so definitely a lot different than the 4 emissions last turn or 14 emissions last turn, and we'll end turn. This means we'll have to roll the die. 1 out of 3 times the die does something bad to us. 2 out of 3 times the die is inconsequential. We're gonna have to roll 1 die because we're gonna get 1 band. I didn't care about the solar thing, that's fine, excuse me. So then we get the extra go to the board, so 5 will hit us our first band. We've never seen that before, and then 2 go here. It's a charming system to add the bands. So we rolled the Amazon, dieback of Amazon advances, which doesn't have a tipping point, so it does nothing. If we unfortunately rolled one of these winterized ones, or Arctic Sea, we would have to add carbon, and if it was thawing of permafrost, we'd have to add carbon. So we're just lucky we didn't roll that. Great. Now we have to do our crisis cards. This one crisis card we saw, this is the bad one. It would have eaten our trees and add carbon, but we reduce it by 1 per every ecological resilience we have. You can just draw a crisis card. So the first one says lose a resilience, and then the second one says here's a forest fire, and you just get goofed. There's no way to interact with that well. Next, it says lose 1 social resilience. Now it says ignore if you tucked a card underneath here. Now we can't tuck cards underneath face down crisis cards because every round we have 1 face up and 2 face down. You can't. But if we had a way to flip up crisis cards, which there's some pretty bad effects that do that, we'd have to spend another card on this just to basically save 1 social resilience. We're not going to do that. That's a terrible use of cards. So we lose a social resilience. Now every player loses a social resilience. Notice how we can't lose a social resilience. So we now have to take a communion crisis instead. So notice how we just got unlucky on the roll of cards. There's a chance that the crisis did nothing to us, and there's a chance that it puts us in a situation where we have no social resilience. So now we have to take 1 communion crisis. Not a big deal, because communion crises were fine. But now all we want to do this turn is reduce our carbon emissions by 8. And if we can, we win the game. All right, choices. These are both very good. These are actually really good for global projects. This one has that sort of tag that we saw before, that as soon as we have 3 regulation tags, whenever we support a regulation card, which would be put it in front, we reduce our demand by 1. Now we're pretty good at generating energy, so I don't think we care about the demand change that much. That being said, if we find a thing that says, again, you make this choice before you see your hand of cards. If we find something that says like increase your demand to reduce your emissions on factories, this will be good. Now this card's also okay. It doesn't make sense in an engine building perspective, but if we tuck a regulation card underneath here, we will draw another card for the rest of the game on every round. So we trade a card now for the future. Now I'm expecting this game to be only 2 more rounds. So trading a card on this turn to have an extra card on next turn doesn't make a lot of sense. If you got this on round 1, sometimes it's okay. But also if you have just a really weird hand where you have extra cards and no way to use regulation tags, like we don't have good ways to use regulation tags besides throwing it out to onshore wind. This is definitely worth something, but I think I'm just going to go for this because we're like 2 2/3 there. Engine building. All right, you drew some cards. Nice. Let's see what we got. So tree farming is sick. It's okay. It's once per round. And if we have 3 ecological tags in a single row, which we could do in theory, as much as it would cost us 2 cards to get 1 tree, that sounds good because trees are really good. But technically this is just 2 cards to go -1. And that's bad. This is nice. It's once per round. If we have 2, this has a good term for this tag. It's called incentives. So if we have 2 incentives, we can once per round reduce our apartments. We'll just hit this button, by the way, before we forget. This is awful. It adds resiliences. We don't care. This allows you to flip crisis cards so you can look at them. We don't care about that. And then this is a bad hand. Straight up, this is not a good hand. We have very few ways to impact ourselves positively to win the game. What we can do now is we can do this 4 times to reduce our energy by 4. That'll put us at 12. We can do the clean cook stoves 0 times. We can do tree farms once. That'll put us at 11. So we have to find 2 more ways to take out of energy. What's the social studies info on the alternative cement? What did they use that's more sustainable? Alternative. Where did you see alternative cement? Oh, here. I think I've seen some weird things with alternative cement. I actually have read a bit into this because I was doing engineering stuff at school for a while. I've seen some things that have like organic compounds in it. Cement is the 2nd most widely used substance in the world after water. That's cool. But manufacturing cement produces billions of tons of greenhouse gas emissions each year because its ingredients are heated to extremely high temperatures, requiring lots of energy that often comes from burning fossil fuels. To reduce emissions from cement production, research and developing alternative ingredients, including volcanic ash, recycled glass, and industrial waste products that can be suitable for conventional cement ingredients such as limestone and clay. Cool. And it's really cool that you can look that up quickly in the context of a board game. I think that's sick. Now, how do we win? How do we win? This hand is trash. So this card is the worst card. We don't need this icon at all. So we'll start with the clean energy investments just to draw a card. We have no way of drawing more cards off of this, but if we spend more cards to draw a card, it doesn't make sense. This is also a terrible card. We have drawn a hand that won't allow us to win the game. This sucks. We now have to play another round. So if that's the case, what are we doing? They should sell this game to high schools. Yes, this game should be in high schools. It would be sick. Try accessing agendas. You want me to run into this ice? It's melting. I'm so sorry. Okay, so we can see the upcoming crisis, which here, so notice that our thermometer has 2 carbon on it, right? And so we're adding 6, which means because we're surviving into round 3, which you shouldn't go to round 3, if we don't decrease, we need to decrease this emissions down to 2 net carbon to not introduce another band. It is our best interest to make it to 2 carbon, so we need to reduce 4 carbon this turn at a minimum, and we can. If we just mash onshore winds 4 times, we'll reduce to 4 carbon, and we'll just probably only have 1 band, unless we roll a bad die. So that is our priority, is not get a second band. That matters more than anything. Don't get a second band. Okay. If we don't have a second band, we can ignore the upcoming crisis card and just hope that these are fine. So all we're going to do is reduce our thing by 4 and then try and win in 2 turns. It looks like this hand won't allow us to win in... Sorry, we'll win in 3 turns. This hand won't allow us to win in 2 turns, so we're just going to do the best that we can with what we have. And by that, I mean, we're just going to mash this button a heck of a lot. So we can do this 4 times, and then we can just do regenerative agriculture, use it because it's free, and then put in a tree. I don't have anything smarter to do here. So this increases 2 energy, reduces by 1. So this is paying off. Our engine works. 2 energy, reduced by 1. So we're weak on social resilience, but like, what's the chance that that's a problem? I honestly don't know. Every time we do this, we reduce our dirty energy by 1. We'll get rid of that. Same thing. All right. So now we're at 12. So we're only going to put 2, which means we won't hit the next band, which is the most important thing you can do. We'll put the regenerative agriculture here on top of our friends, and then we can use this once per round. So it's free. So we just get a resilience. I'll take it because it's free. And we did it that so that we could put 3 ecological tags here so that, oh, that reduces our demand by 1. That's doesn't matter. But then we can also add a tree. So we're actually only net carbon 1. If we drew a slightly better hand, we could have won this turn. You have to be negative. You don't want to be neutral. You need to be negative to hit drawdown. So this is going to just, we have to survive the crisis phase and we'll see what happens. So we add 11 carbon, 12 are sequestered. So by hitting the onshore wind button, are you investing tons of resources into building more wind farms? Yeah, I think that's my explanation of what's going on. Shit. So we hit thawing permafrost. So we rolled the ice and we with the die and we got the thawing permafrost. So this is going to add 2 carbon, not to the thermometer, luckily, but to the ecosystem. So that just means next turn we'll start with 2 extra carbon. So we have to work slightly harder to win the game. So you notice it'll go here. So technically we're at net carbon 3 next round. We go through the crisis. This doesn't do anything because it's 1 per band and we only have 1 band, and it's reduced by ecological resilience, which we have. Reduced by ecological resilience, we have. This eats trees for every cattle deforestation. So this actually eats 2 of our trees. So this was just a bad roll. I think there's only 2 specific emissions that have cards associated with them. I think there's 1 for cattle and there's 1 for garbage. I'm pretty sure. So unfortunately, we just lose 2 trees because we have 2 cattle, which sucks because now we're at net carbon 4. So we have to work slightly harder this turn. We have no dirty energy to get rid of. So we just have to hope for the best that we get cards that can remove our emissions. You get 1 green energy transition triggers per 2 onshore wind. Yeah. So anytime we take, no, sort of. So every time we take onshore wind, we generate 2 clean, which means we reduce 1 dirty. So every time we do onshore wind, it generates 2 and reduces 1, if that makes sense, right? Okay. We have 2 cards. This is a busted card. It, especially on your last turn, anybody can tuck any number of cards underneath here, and then you can use a card to reduce the effects of a bad thing by 1. It's just technically not good, but it means if you have extra cards on the last turn, you can just tuck your whole hand underneath here and just tank the crisis phase and nothing hits you. It is a very good time to draw it. Now on the other side, you have a busted, weird, not busted, but like a bad, weird thing. And this is in the camp of these like geological engineering things, the geoengineering, not geological, but geoengineering. Is that what they're called? It's like geoengineering. Yeah, the strange tag. And it says at the beginning of the crisis stage, if someone tucks up to 3 cards here, which let me tell you, the cost of tucking up to 3 cards here is absurd. You roll a d6, and then based off of what you rolled, you either add bands to the thermometer or temporarily remove bands from the thermometer. And temporarily means basically the crisis phase of that round might not hit you. But again, you have to tuck cards here and roll a d6, and it has to work out for you. That doesn't make any sense. That's the thing too, like there's dice rolling cards, and dice rolling cards sound fun. And there's a lot of games where I'll do the fun dice rolling thing, but like the sort of idea of this game and the theme of this game really disincentivizes me from doing the fun weird thing because the theme is so dire. If I roll the die and it adds 2 thermometer bands and then the crisis cards just ruin me. Oh, there's another forest fire. That's great. Like, I'll tilt really hard. That's terrible. This is not the sort of thing we should be effing around with. Which, like, if it's, you know, Thunder Road Vendetta and I roll a d6 and 1 out of 3 times my car blows up, sign me up. But it's just so strange that this is, well, not strange because it makes sense, but this is entirely different. All right, looking at our hand, not a good hand. This hand has still no ways to reduce our emissions. This is a bad thing. We can definitely add a tree, and we can definitely take away a factory. So now we're at 12 emissions. The problem is we lost a tree, and so we're still 3 net carbon. So apparently we're gonna have a 4-turn game, it seems. We can draw 1 card here. If we tuck this underneath here, we can draw still 1 card. So we'll draw a card. We need this to have, that's what we needed to have. Now, if we have 2 to 3, what's this called again? Incentives tags. We increase our demand by 1, and we can remove cattle. Each round 1 per grass. So the problem is, okay, we can stack these up. We can put half earth rewilding, that's a cool term, into here. Then we can put vertical farming on top of it. And then we can do this a lot of different times. We can remove both of our cattle. And then we can probably close the game off by doing well-being budget. Yeah, I think we have it. Again, we have no dirty energy. So this will go here. We don't want to do the text on it because it's silly. Then we'll put this on top. Then we'll use this. We can't get another incentive tag here. So we'll increase our demand. Our demand is fine. We're producing way too much electricity, and we can just keep doing this. We technically only have to do it twice, but now we're producing only 9 emissions. The issue is that the permafrost melted, and so that we still have net carbon 0. So we have to reduce 1 more. So if that's the case, the only thing that can reduce carbon is this card, which takes 2 cards and allows us to not only bring down our demand, which we don't really care about, but it also can clear 1 type of emission. This card is very, very bad in terms of like, this is 3 cards for -2, which is not a good place to be in, but we're allowed to do it, so we will. And so we'll just put this on top of that. We'll spend 3 cards, or 2 cards, excuse me. And we'll remove, technically this can matter. There's certain crises that care about certain things. I think the only other crisis that can hit us is, I think there is an oil crisis, but I think there's also a trash crisis. So I'll get rid of the trash stuff. And now we'll do the thing where we just tuck this card underneath here to say that once per crisis phase, we can ignore 1 effect because we tucked 1 card. We're now at -1, and so we just have to survive this round. Even 4 turns isn't enough to build any engine, unlike Res Arcana, because you always have to invest resources in thwarting the plot. Yep. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. I don't know. I've repeated myself too much. I probably will stop, but it's silly. So here we have 11 in terms of our sequestered. We're adding less than that, so we actually take them off. For what it's worth, if we took off at least 3 more, we'd actually undo this band. So we received Drawdown, hooray. We rolled the die. Unfortunately, the die is a tipping point of the Amazon, so we actually add a carbon and we lose a tree. Doesn't matter. We still hit Drawdown. Forest Fires has no effect. This has no effect. And this says each player loses 1 infrastructure resilience, so that's fine. We win the game. All right, that's Daybreak. And that's probably going to be the end of the stream. That shows you the game. And for what it's worth, I think a lot of people will enjoy this game. I think, again, a big part of this is also the physical components, which are charming. It's all wood and recycled cardboard, and it looks really quite nice. I want to repeat that this board makes no sense. It's not necessary. It's nice to have something between all the players, but for how big this board is, you barely use it. It's just a place to put your trees and these die rolling tracks, which, like, who cares? Yeah. Oh, I think actually you can lose if you don't do it fast enough. I forgot about this. Hold on. This is a huge zoom in. I think there's a chart here. Yeah, you only have 6 turns to win the game. I forgot about that. I have played so many games with this that I forgot you need to win in 6 turns, which obviously that tells you how long do you think the designers of the game think this game could be. But we won on turn 4. Our first game we won on turn 2. But if you don't win before turn 7, I think you just lose the game, if I'm not mistaken. I think this track goes down every turn. I totally forgot about that. I don't even know how BGA tracks that, but it just hasn't been a relevant lose condition for the way that I play this game. I think the engine building systems in which you tuck cards and put cards in front, it is charming. It's quite fun. It's flexible. I think in a game where engine building would actually make sense, it would actually be a pretty good engine to repurpose for something else. But as you probably heard me say before, this is not my favorite game. I've still played now 45 games of it because I can play a game in like 7 minutes, and on BGA it's really easy. I no longer have this. I'm so surprised that the amount of praise for this game that exists, because mechanically, I just don't think it's all there. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Sorry if it was repetitive. My voice hurts at this point, but I wanted to show you Daybreak because it's a pretty special game. And for what it's worth, I'll probably still end up playing it because I kind of do enjoy it as much as I think the systems don't make a lot of sense. I will leave it open for about 30 seconds while I take any questions. How's everyone's Friday doing? It's warm in here. Maybe that's outside. I can't tell. Today I did a whole bunch of editing on Marvel Champion stuff. I'm doing some recording tomorrow for Arkham. On Sunday, it's the Eternal Super League. If you're dropping by, we'd love to have you. And then it's just been really, really busy. It's just been good. Thanos just joined, so I'll have to catch the VOD. Yeah, it's a short enough VOD. We taught how the game works and we played through it. Again, if you want to try this game on Board Game Arena is entirely free. However, if you don't pay the like $7 per whatever a month, you can't create games, so you can't play solo, but you can join games. So you can go to the game section and see if someone has a public lobby and jump in and just try it out yourself if you want. I don't know how nice people are on BGA and randoms. It could be game dependent. Oh, I gotta hide the BGA chat because who knows what can happen there. But you can always try the game out here for sure. It is on Tabletop Simulator, I'm assuming. I have not played it there, but I used to play this in person. You made your point without hammering. It was fine. Thanks for the stream. Of course, Galeheart. Thanks for dropping by. Zeke, hopefully you still enjoy the game. Let me know if that changes anything. Have you played the game a lot with others? No. And I want to be very clear that like my experience with this game has had some pretty big holes in it. The first time I played this game was at a Netrunner meetup at Mansion Runner, and I got to play this with some lovely people. We had 4 people at the table. It was like Plural, Bushi, Jamie, and I, and we got bodied. Like the USA collapsed due to social unrest, which like, but we got bodied. And the problem was very clearly is we were playing the game like smart engine builders, being like, I'm going to invest in this because in 3 turns, this is going to be a really efficient action. And we got totally wrecked. I talked to Plural because it was Plural's copy because Plural kickstarted it, came on early. And Plural said that he was struggling to win the game. I haven't talked to him since if he's played more of it. But then I got my copy. My copy was a bit hard to get to. It was a bit of a crisis to get. But then I brought it to the table. I played it with 2 players and we won. We lost really poorly. And then I realized I'm like, wait, just ignore the engine building, Maddie. You and I just play it as quickly as we can to get the black number down. And we won on turn 3. And Maddie thought the game was incredibly uninteresting. We ran it back 2 or 3 times, and Maddie's like, I think I've had enough of this. I played it solo a bunch. I played with Pat. But the majority of the game I've played are not 4 players. The majority has been 1 or 2 players. Vast majority is 1 players. And at 4 players, I think the game is definitely more interesting because there's a lot more ways to cooperate with other people, for sure. And everyone has like an asymmetric starting power and asymmetric starting issues. People don't really care about mechanics. Kyle, from what he's read, do you think that's the case? Like, you can make a dog shit, and I'm not saying this is dog shit mechanics, but like, you can make a game with really, that is true to some extent. You can definitely make a game with a really good theme and really good like components and bad mechanics, and it'll still be a lot of people's favorite game. And there's nothing wrong with that, for sure. Have you played any other world environment themed board games that you like more? I don't know what games would fall in that category. Earthborn Rangers kind of does, because it is like at least environmental conscious. And it's about exploring and interacting. That's not a game about like terraforming Mars. I've played Terraforming Mars before. I don't like a lot of it. I played it 1 time. I think I really enjoy, I like Ark Nova a lot, which kind of falls in that camp because it does have like a conservation ship angle. It's not about like making a profitable park and putting things into cells. Like a Zombicide. I've played Zombicide once at work. It was a friend's copy. It seemed okay. But maybe Zombicide is your example of something that has bad mechanics and you know, components that people care about. I think it definitely is. But I think most things that are like Kickstarter, like miniature stuff, CMON stuff, like that, it falls into that camp that people just want to play with plastic minis. And for every game I have, if I could replace the plastic minis with wood print, with like the, you know, screen painted wood figures, every time I would take the wood. Oh my God, playing with wood is so much better. Speaking of Earthborn, did you get a chance to look into Hub World? Yeah, so I watched like the Team Covenant, not the video they put up yesterday, the video from the day before. That's actually how I saw the Team Covenant was doing this on their streams. I'm like, wait, I can do that. That's kind of sick. I played 1 game online with Patrick on lunch on Friday on Tabletop Simulator, or sorry, yesterday on Thursday. It wasn't a good game. We didn't have a good game, but it doesn't mean the game wasn't good. I definitely want to play more of it. Our game just unfortunately wasn't that interesting. CO2 was a big one back in the day that I didn't like it too much. I haven't played the second version though. Oh, CO2. I've heard of that. I guess there are a bunch of like games like that too. The underwater one, isn't that similar? I'm also mistaking CO2 for K2, which is the mountain climbing one. It's definitely not that. CO2 board game. I don't think I've seen this from 2012. Looks like a very similar theme, doesn't it? The procedure of the game is probably more important for people's enjoyment. See all the extremely midpoint, salad, middleweight Euros out there. Yep. Yeah. The procedure. Yeah, notice this is what they say too for player counts, right? If you're playing 2 players, you're always China versus the US because they just work better together. If you're 3 players, is majority world, Europe and US. And so China just shows up back again at 4 players, which is kind of interesting. And if you're 1, you can pick up any board, and the boards don't matter for what it's worth. It's just color coded because you start with the solo starting cards. And there are some difficulty things. Again, we didn't show them, but if you want to make the game more difficult or easier, the game comes, the manual is not perfect, but it's really well laid out and it's really nice to look at. CMYK does fantastic production values. These also 5 tokens are kind of nice, but there are some like little cards that you can add that have little modifiers. They look like this. Some of them make the game harder, some of them make them easier. They're not like massive changes like picking up a Spirit Island, a scenario where it's like fundamentally how you have to approach the problem is different. They're generally like, oh, every turn this goes up by 1, this goes down by 1. Every turn you remove this, you get a 6th card. Like they're relatively simple stuff. And then there's a difficulty slider as well for different setups. So if you want to play extreme 2 players, you should be China and Modern World, and there should be 16 trees and 11 oceans, but there is no scaling setups for standard for solo. So it seems like there's a bit more variability the more players you play. CO2 in another game, can't remember, was co-opetition style, not fully co-op. Oh, cool. I think there are definitely many games which don't hold together well when you give them enough attention to develop a meta, unfortunately. Yeah, like maybe I'm the problem. Or like what's it called, the Halifax Hammer kind of situation, or like if there's the first order optimal strategy. But like I do think inherently, if your game does not withstand that sort of like, you know, hard play, it's probably not a game for me. But this could be a lot of people's favorite game, and there's no judgment with that. If you don't play the way I do, maybe the game is more fun and you're gonna have a more fun time doing it. So please feel free to ignore me. If you're the problem, I'm also the problem. Yeah, right. Right. For what it's worth too, like Res Arcana ran into that issue too. Like I brought this up earlier on the stream, but Res Arcana is another game where you have a deck of cards, and cards have modal uses, right? And there are like engine pieces where you can spend resources to generate other resources. There's an image right here where this elemental spring. It costs 4 resources, and then every upkeep it generates 3 resources, which you tell me how many turns it takes for that to be tempo positive when you understand that as an action you can discard an item to generate 2 resources. So every card has to be better than a click for 2 at a minimum, and this is a click for -1. Next turn it's a click for +2, like a click for 2 in 2 turns. And when you play Res Arcana against strong players, the game is probably different than how it was maybe play tested, but the game is still fun. That's because fundamentally it is a drafting game. And so your deck of elemental stuff and your alchemy and your spells and your wizards and your horses and stuff were a deck that you drafted. So you actually do make an engine, as opposed to Daybreak where you just randomly draw 5 cards and hope it makes sense. Probably speaks more about the quality of Netrunner that you've always found it crunchy through all scrutiny. Oh yeah, Netrunner's sick. Netrunner's really good. Speaking of co-opetition, you should do a playthrough of New Angels on this channel. Good luck fitting all the people on the board. I have a copy of New Angels. It was like a Christmas present from my brother many moons ago. I haven't been able to sit down and play it in what feels like maybe 7 years, no joke. But it's always been the thing that I want to play with enough folks, but always something else comes up. I have no idea how to like do a board game with 4 people in this space. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense. We might do 3 people on next Thursday playing Netrunner, which is going to be really fun. Res Arcana, same designers, Pandemic? No, this is by Thomas Lehman. I don't know what Thomas Lehman is known for, but ooh, that's a nice photo. Race for the Galaxy. That can't be surprising. Yeah. So good card game engine games. Yeah, Race. Very, very cool. I really like learning a game and playing it a lot. I generally enjoy my first playthrough much less than my 10th. Oh, for sure, me too. And that's like the sort of weird thing that comes out with Daybreak is like, why have I played this game so much? And it's like, I'm looking for something in there. Then I hope one point in time, like my angle is going to change and I'm going to have some appreciation of a system that I was ignorant before. It's like, you know, when you play your first game of Hub World Eidolon, you complain about the balance and you're like, what the hell are you talking about? You don't know shit about shit. Shut up, Andre. So I am like, I do want to play a bit more, and I probably will play more Daybreak after this. I definitely will. Yeah, Race for the Galaxy. That's why it sounded familiar. That's a game I haven't had enough time with. My brother loved it. He taught it to me once, and he did a very bad job teaching it. Bless my brother. He is the best. But I bounced off of it pretty hard. That game has its own language of icons, which is like so unclear, particularly for how nice Daybreak is. New Angels' big downside is the minimum of 4 players. Yeah. Solomir, last, what was it? Not an NBC, the last Nationals we ran here 2 years ago, on day 2, a whole bunch of players were playing, it was really cute. While we were running the top 8, a bunch of players were playing somebody brought their copy of that game of New Angeles. And it was like people from all over. It was like Americans. It was like I think Alex was playing from the West Coast too. So it was like a very cool eclectic group of people from all different places. Me desperately trying to find a way for Longest Road to not be the thing that decides every single game of Hamlet. Still gonna keep playing it though. What does that mean, Lucille? So this is Race for the Planet. Next is Race for the City, then Race for the Neighborhood. I feel like those games exist. Race for the City has to exist. Race for the Neighborhood probably does. New Angeles stream would be hype. This is also the issue too, is like the way that I like to stream stuff on tabletop requires me to put a lot of effort into it because I want to be able to show all the cards and all the graphics and make it as approachable as possible. Like that is my goal. And so for like, what's it called? For Marvel Champions, I went and I grabbed scans of every single card and I labeled them and I have my rig so I can pull them up at instant speed. And that's the sort of thing where like, you know, for many reasons, board game designers don't give you those files that you can create an archive like that. For what it's worth, I think you can with Daybreak. Like all the cards are available here. Like that's all you need. Like actually no, they're not here because I can't see the actual card can. Oh no, I can. I could save all of these and make like a Daybreak overlay. But for a lot of games like New Angeles, that wouldn't be possible. Race for the Galaxy is definitely dated in some ways. Fiance and I got into it again lately, and it's just a nice chill game to play in the evening. I believe it. Res Arcana fit that bill for me as well. There's a couple card games like that that are just like chill things to sit down and enjoy. What are your top picks to play on BGA? Oh, I'm not a very good person to ask for that because I don't do a lot on BGA. If I go to my game section, a lot of it's solo stuff. So like I will solo Turing Machine. I solo Challengers a fair bit. Challengers is sick. I've been getting into Challengers. Daybreak is fine. My partner and I played Arnak. We really didn't like it online because it changes players really, really consistently and quickly when you play two players. I think the implementations of Arc Nova are fantastic on BGA. Heat, not for me. I was playing with Pat and I wanted to give up because I mostly play on BGA asynchronously, and Heat is a game where you should really memorize what's in your deck and in your discard pile, and you're not allowed to check, and that just didn't work well for me. But Arc Nova is so good. There's a reason why I actually pay for BGA is to play Arc Nova. And a bunch of people in my testing group are like very good at Arc Nova, so I get my ass kicked if I play them or get to watch them stream the game, which is good fun. But I'm a big Arc Nova fan, and the implementation of Arc Nova, it's a good game to play asynchronously as well. It works out really well. The board game Hamlet, I feel like every game I've played has come down to who built the longest road rather than any of the clever tile interaction mechanics, but it's really fun despite that. I don't know if I know about this game. Like Hamlet as in a little town, not Hamlet as in the tragedy. Oh, I think I saw a review of this. Did Shut Up and Sit Down do a review of this at some point? Yeah, the little town space is coming together. This game looked really charming. This game looks cool. I don't know if these are like stock pieces. Look at that little horse, little yellow horse. I like the look of this game. Oh, my foot's asleep. Feels a bit like your 2-turn Daybreak games that you keep going back to despite it. Yeah. Maybe it's masochism. Maybe it's not. I don't know. My biggest complaint about Race for the Galaxy is not having other tokens to mark and spend resources. Pitching cards tend to feel like making a messy discard pile. Huh. I don't know enough about that game. I haven't played in a long time. How's Roll for the Galaxy, which I've also heard people think is quite swell. I'm really enjoying Guest of Robin Hood. I'm going to assume that's not a typo, right? That art is nice. This is Fred Serval from GMT. This is a GMT game? Holy shit. GMT games can make nice boxes? The fuck? This is a GMT game. Those pieces look like GMT pieces. I imagine that this is kind of cool. I have one GMT game, which is meant to be like the starter GMT game that a lot of people recommend to be your first GMT game, and I haven't got down to play it. I was meant to play it last winter holiday with my brother-in-law. We kept saying we would play it, but we never found the time to it because they're pretty long. Most GMT games look like social studies textbooks. This one looks like a nice social studies textbook. But I have yet to dive into that sort of world. This looks really cool. Ever played Twilight Imperium? No, I haven't. I don't know why. I guess I haven't. I know a lot of people who do play it. I don't think I've been in a situation where, like, I think I am the board game friend among my friends. Technically, like growing up specifically in college, that was the case. And so I don't think I had enough friends who'd be like, hey, I need 8 of you to learn this rule set and play for like 8 hours. So I never did it. So I've never played it. Guess the Ribbon Hoods is Chef's Kiss. BGA implementation is decent. Oh, this is on BGA. Sick. I can't believe a GMT game looks like this. That's stellar. I haven't played Arc Nova yet. How long does a typical asynchronous turn take? Analyzing the board and then taking your full turn. A single turn, and if you know what you're doing, a turn takes like 30 seconds, not even. The difference is knowing what you want to do. And I think what I end up doing in Arc Nova is actually using the notes section, and I'll write down my plan and my strategy, particularly if I'm playing multiple games or if I'm playing against my my sister or Maddie, who sometimes take a while. If I was playing against like friends from the testing group, I end up taking like 6 or 7 turns a day. But if I play sometimes against my sister, it could be like a turn every 2 days if she doesn't pay attention. So then I have to take the notes, but a turn is not very long. You generally like take one action. And an action is like, I'll buy this card, or I'll build this enclosure, or I'll support this project, something like that. It doesn't take long. The games can take a bit though. But 2-player games, Maddie and I can bang out a 2-player game of Arc Nova in person in an hour. How many other board games would you say look like social studies textbooks? Do you think we could teach an entire curriculum with just board games? Oh, 100%. There's definitely good lists of games that do that. And it's not so much that like you can learn about things, but more so also you can experience things, right? It's also like video games too. It's like, it's one thing to read about, what is it called? The Great Game. But then it's another thing to some extent to play, oh shit, what is that Cole Worley game about Afghanistan? Give it a try. It's really fun, Zeke. It's easily one of my favorite board games. It's immensely replayable. PAX, thank you, Kyle. But then it's another thing to put yourself in the shoes of PAX Premier and give the incentives that people did back then, and then realize why things go the way they do. Like you can learn a lot about not only like a time, a pace, a place, a period. If you just sit down and play PAX Premier, which is like, this is social studies as fuck. Like this looks ridiculous as social studies book. I don't know why we circled that. Yeah, John Company as well. I haven't played John Company yet. I think I'll figure out what I'll wait for me to be in the same room with Jeff and let Jeff teach me John Company at some point. But there's a whole bunch of games like this for sure. Almost all the GMT games like that, because they're generally like war reenactments to some extent. I have on my shelf, the one I haven't played is Sekigahara, the Unification of Japan, which is the GMT game everyone says should be your first GMT game, and I haven't played it yet, but like social studies as anything else. The board is really cool though, because it has these wooden tiles, and the stickers depict how strong the army is, except the stickers are always facing you. So it's kind of cool. It's like Netrunner, like bluffing. Like this black stack of boxes is my opponent's troops, but I can't tell actually what the troops consist of, as much as I know there's at least 6 units there. And that seems to be like a really charming mechanic, but of course I haven't played the game yet. But the game looks like, well, it doesn't look like this, that's for sure. If Stratego is good. Yeah, I'm not sure what Stratego is. I don't think it really. Well, you're Canadian, you would know, but I don't know what Stratego is. I never played it. Okay. Cool. Thanks for hanging out on the stream. If you're watching this later, you want to leave a like on the video. It honestly just helps this channel get a bit more views. I'm going to be uploading more video stuff on this channel, mostly Marvel Champions. It's a big chance that this channel will end up being a Marvel Champions channel at some point. Maybe I'll change the name. I don't know. But I like having a space just to hang out on Fridays and do like whatever interesting stuff that we want to do that's not Netrunner. What if I'm watching it now? Can I still leave a like? Yeah, for sure. For real though, yeah, that actually does help. Hopefully y'all enjoy your weekend. Oh, it's, by the way, it's like the America's District this weekend. I totally forgot about that. If you're going out and playing, or you're watching, I'm assuming there's going to be a stream. Good luck and have fun. Have a nice time. But otherwise, we'll be back on Sunday with Eternal Super League. It starts at 3, not at 2, because of my local time zone. If you're a European viewer, it's at the same time that you think it is, or parts of Australia. And then otherwise, we'll be back on Tuesday. Let me know what you think about Daybreak if you're watching this in the future. And thanks so much for hanging out. See you in the next one. Enjoy your weekend. Ciao.